Chapter 148. As soon as the voice fell, Ling and the others immediately became alert. They all approached the carriage and looked at the person who had come. This voice was a bit familiar. Chu Qingyan knit her brows, and then she seemed to have thought of something. She lifted the curtain and looked towards the source of the voice. She said with a faint smile, "So it's Miss Xiao. Long time no see. Are you well?" The person who came was Xiao. At this moment, she was also seated in the carriage. A servant girl lifted the curtains for her, revealing her pretty face. She saw that His Highness King Ying's personal guards were surrounding Chu Qingyan and had their hands on her waist. It was as if they would attack her if she showed any disrespect. Ruo's heart was filled with envy and jealousy once again. What ability did Chu Qingyan have to receive this kind of treatment? She thought about it. If she replaced Chu Qingyan, then these people would be protecting her. Therefore, Ruo was even more determined in her plan. She said to Chu Qingyan with a smile, "Thanks for Ninth Miss Chu's concern. Everything is fine. I wonder if Ninth Miss Chu is free right now?" Ruo would like to invite Ninth Miss Chu for a cup of tea. Chu Qingyan wanted to refuse, but then she thought about it. The Imperial Palace was not on the same path as the Yao Manor. This person appearing here, it probably wasn't as simple as inviting her for a cup of tea. Then I'll have to thank Miss Xiao. Please lead the way. Chu Qingyan agreed with a smile. Ruo saw her agree so easily and felt proud. She had the driver turn the carriage around and head forward. "Little Princess Consort, aren't you worried that this person has some ulterior motives?" Ling asked with a bit of worry. Ethereal and the others had already returned to the manor in front of the heavenly prison. Right now, only Xining and Ling were by her side. "It's fine, I'll go meet her." Chu Qingyan was not worried that this person would play any tricks. Beside her was the most powerful cavalry under Big Ice Cube's command, Xiao Lai Cavalry. Seeing the young princess' insistence, Ling nodded. In just a few days, the young princess' actions had made them look at her in a new light. Now, she had become their backbone. Although she was a bit immature, she could barely support the overall situation. So, Ling turned the carriage around and followed. When they arrived at a tea house, the carriage stopped. Ruo got off and said to Chu Qingyan, "This is the place." Chu Qingyan nodded. She held Xining's hand and followed her slowly. Ruo noticed her legs and curled her lips. She turned around and walked up the stairs. Xining was about to remind her master that her leg was injured and she couldn't go upstairs, but she was stopped by her master. Chu Qingyan shook her head. "It's nothing." Most of the people downstairs were single customers, and there was no independent space. If this person wanted to talk to him in private, she wouldn't do it in such a noisy place. He hoped that Ruo wouldn't disappoint him. Otherwise, he would have wasted his effort in enduring the pain in his leg to go upstairs. The group entered a private room. Ruo asked, "What kind of tea does Ninth Miss Chu want to drink?" "As you wish. The guest will follow the host's wishes." Chu Qingyan sat down and smiled faintly. Even though it's already autumn, the weather is still a bit dry. "Why don't we order some flower tea to relieve the heat?" Ruo turned around and said to the waiter, "Give me a pot of chrysanthemum tea and 2 plates of pastries." "Okay." The waiter agreed and left. This tea house served the tea very quickly. Even the pastries were prepared. Chu Qingyan looked at the rising steam in front of her and smiled faintly. "What business does Miss Xiao have with Qingyan? When we first met on the street that day, Ruo felt that Ninth Miss Chu was a clever and obedient little sister. I've always wanted to find a chance to get to know Ninth Miss Chu." Ruo said to Chu Qingyan with a smile. Chu Qingyan smiled faintly and said, "You're too polite. Then let's talk about some intimate things. Can you?" Ruo looked at Ling and Xining behind her and hesitated to speak. Chu Qingyan knew what she meant and had Ling and Xining leave. Ling said worriedly, "Little Princess Fei, this subordinate will be outside. Call this subordinate if you need anything." Chu Qingyan nodded, and the two left. Ruo said sarcastically, "The subordinates of the King of England are really loyal to Mimi. Ruo is envious." Chu Qingyan felt that the word Mimi sounded a bit strange. Were people from ancient times all so familiar with each other? Also, she felt that Yao Ingrua's words were a bit strange ever since she entered this tea house. It was a bit grating. Chu Qingyin avoided her words. She didn't want to tangle with her and said directly, "Miss Yao, what business do you have with me? Why don't you say it?" Yao Ingrua was a bit surprised that Chu Qingyin went straight to the point. It seemed that this person wasn't stupid even though she was young. She knew that she had business with her, so she slowly poured tea for the two of them and slowly said, "His Highness the Fourth Prince was assassinated and His Royal Highness was imprisoned. The court is panicking and rumors are spreading in the capital. Mimi must be very worried. Has the King of England's Fu thought of a countermeasure to save His Royal Highness?" Chu Qingyin understood a bit. Last time on the street, she had struck up a conversation with a big ice cube. She must have admired the big ice cube. She said faintly, "Miss Yao, my Highness has been wronged. His Majesty will definitely clear my Highness' name." When Yao Ingrua heard her say "my Highness," her heart felt like it had been stabbed. She said with a fake smile, "Mimi should know that this matter won't be resolved so easily, right?" Chu Qingyin frowned. "What do you mean? It's no secret that His Royal Highness is not favored. Will the person in that position let go of this opportunity?" Yao Ingrua didn't mention who that person was, but Chu Qingyin's heart sank because she had just met him today. Yao Ingrua saw her pale face and smiled proudly. "But His Royal Highness can be cleared of suspicion." This sentence successfully attracted Chu Qingyin's attention. She raised her head and looked at her. "I'd like to hear the details. My grandfather is the current Grand Tutor. There are countless students under him. As long as they jointly write a petition, His Majesty will be afraid. After all, talents are a scarce resource in the Sichuan. Therefore, His Majesty won't risk the world to convict His Royal Highness." Yao Ingrua looked at her fingernails and said unhurriedly. Chu Qingyin raised her eyebrows. "What's your condition?" When a weasel pays a New Year's greetings to a chicken, it always has bad intentions. She didn't believe that Yao Ingrua would be willing to help for free. Yao Ingrua raised her head and saw the clear look in her eyes. She suddenly felt that it was a little dazzling. Why did the curve of her lips have the shadow of His Royal Highness? "Mimi, you're really smart. Of course, you'll succeed in everything you do. If you have something to say, just say it." Chu Qingyin interrupted her boasting and looked at her coldly. Yao Ingrua sneered. "Since you've made it clear, then I'll say it directly. I can ask my grandfather to save His Royal Highness, but the condition is that you have to leave His Royal Highness." Chapter 149. What? Chu Qingyin looked at her in disbelief. "Is Miss Yao joking? I can say anything, but I don't know how to joke. Younger sister, do you want to consider it? If His Royal Highness is convicted, then as the future princess consort, it will be difficult for you to escape. Why don't you agree to my conditions? You're not suited for this official life anyway. So why don't you get rid of it as soon as possible? I'll send you away safely and even prepare the money you need. I'll guarantee that you won't have to worry for the rest of your life." Chu Qingyin sneered in her heart. She really treated her like a child. As the granddaughter of a grand tutor, how much wealth could she have? Moreover, if she agreed to her plan, what awaited her wouldn't be freedom, but a path of no return. Could it be that Miss Yao is suited for it? She retorted, "Younger sister doesn't need to worry about whether I'm suited for it or not." Yao Ingrua picked up the teacup and took a sip. She smiled back at her. Chu Qingyin tapped her fingers on the table and calmly said, "Miss Yao, I appreciate your good intentions, but I'm afraid I can't agree. If His Highness knows that I'm using this kind of price to exchange for him, he'll probably be angry. I don't want him to be angry. Even if I'm convicted in the end, I'm willing to accompany him." Yao Ingrua didn't expect this answer. She wasn't willing to give up and continued, "Aren't you afraid of death?" "Death? Who isn't afraid? But it depends on who I'm with." If it was with the big ice cube, she wasn't afraid. Chu Qingyin stood up and smiled. "Miss Yao, you should call Qingyin by her name when you see her in the future. Qingyin can't accept being called younger sister." Yao Ingrua was stunned. Chu Qingyin stopped before she left and turned around to look at her. "But there's one thing I think you do have a good point. Everyone outside thinks that His Highness is ugly and frightening and doesn't want to get close to him, but you have a special liking for him. It can be seen that you have good taste. Chu Qingyan raised her teacup. The tea is not bad. Thank you for your hospitality. Yao Yingruo watched her leave with a gloomy face. Of course, she had good taste. 7 years ago, when the King of England led the army to repel the enemy and return to protect the country, she saw him riding on a war horse and was already fascinated. No, it was even earlier than 8 years ago. She was still a child who didn't know anything. She went to the temple with her family, but got separated. She hid under a tree and cried. She met him by chance, and he casually asked the guards to bring her back. She would never forget that when he turned around, his silver mask had accidentally fallen off. She had hurriedly picked it up and handed it to him, only to see that peerless face. She had thought that she would never see such a handsome young man again in her life. He took the mask. The personal guard asked if he wanted to silence the witness. He hesitated and said, "Forget it." That was why she was able to survive until now. In the end, under the warning of his personal guard, she left with him in a daze. After that, she never had such close contact with him again. How lucky she was to have met him back then. Her heart had been lost just like that. The King of England was not as bad as the rumors said. He was a peerless, handsome man. He was knowledgeable and resourceful. She would be happy to be with such a man for the rest of her life. He fulfilled all of her expectations of a partner when she was young. So she had always been looking for an opportunity to get close to him, wanting to ask him if he still remembered that little girl from back then. But year after year, he spent very little time in the capital. If he wasn't training outside, he was leading troops on an expedition. When he returned this year, an imperial edict bestowing a marriage had been passed down, killing all of her hopes. Today, she did not hesitate to threaten Chu Qingyan and ask her to leave. She was not sure if she had the chance to sit in that position, but she believed that with the attitude of the people in the capital who avoided the King of England, she had a 90% chance of winning. In addition, her grandfather was the imperial tutor, and her father was the teacher of the fourth prince. She was not afraid that she would not have a chance. That was a piece of unpolished jade. She did not expect that Chu Qingyan would get it. She also did not expect that Chu Qingyan would reject her like this. Yao Yingruo gritted her teeth. Chu Qingyan, there will be a day when I defeat you. Chu Qingyan left the room. Huo Ling's expression was a bit strange, but she was not feeling well right now, so she did not ask any questions. The group hurried back to the palace. Just as she stepped into the main courtyard, she was met with a bear hug from her father. Kai, father really wants to stick a spring onion. Chu Qingyan's eyes became hot. Father, don't worry, I will save the spring onion. Father Chu cried a few times, and Mother Chu on the side noticed that something was wrong with her daughter. She immediately pulled Father Chu away and asked worriedly, Kai, what's wrong with your leg? Why can't you walk properly? Chu Qingyan laughed softly and comforted her worried mother. It's fine, it's just a bit bruised. I'll just apply some medicine later. Ethereal's medicine is very good. Last time I accidentally cut my hand and sprinkled some medicine on it, but it didn't even leave a scar. Mother Chu was still a bit worried and supported her daughter into the courtyard. Father Chu looked at his daughter who was limping and thought about Blockhead and Black Impermanence who were at their wits' end this afternoon. He had a plan in his heart and disappeared like a wisp of smoke. Mother Chu pulled up her daughter's trousers and saw the bloody wound. Mother Chu could not hold back, and her eyes turned red. Chu Qingyan sighed softly. If she had known earlier, she would not have let her mother help her apply medicine. However, her mother did not ask much. She took the medicine from Xining's hand and carefully applied it for her. Seeing that her mother did not dare to use too much force, Chu Qingyan was filled with emotion. Mother, I feel that I'm very blessed. It's so good to have father and mother's love. Mother Chu's melancholy disappeared with her words. She shook her head and said with a smile, which parent in the world doesn't love their children? Chu Qingyan was a bit sad when she heard this. Yes, the big ice cube was a child that her parents did not love. However, she only dared to say this in her heart. She did not dare to say it out loud for fear of bringing disaster to her parents. After treating the wound, Chu Qingyin looked at the sky. It was already night. She let her parents stay the night and instructed the servants to inform the Chu estate. Suddenly not seeing her father, Chu Qingyin could not help but get out of bed and go out of the room to look for him. She found her father squatting in a corner with his back facing her. She could not help but walk up to him. However, she heard a strange grinding sound. "Father, what are you doing?" Seeing that it was his daughter, Father Chu raised his hand and proudly showed off the large knife he had stolen from Blockhead. "I'm sharpening the knife." "Sharpening the knife for what?" Chu Qingyin could not squat down anymore. She leaned against the wall and asked curiously, "I'm sharpening the knife until it's smooth and sharp. Then we can go to the imperial prison and rescue the inverted onion." Father Chu lowered his head and continued to sharpen the stone. "Father wants to break the prison?" Chu Qingyin was a bit amused, but she was also a bit moved. "Father, aren't you afraid? I just want to rescue the inverted onion. It doesn't matter if I'm afraid or not." Chapter 150. Inside Mingchen Hall, Xiao Ran slowly woke up and was pleasantly surprised by the people in the room. "Consort, you sent someone to invite an imperial physician." After treatment, the imperial physician said that as long as he recuperated well, he would be able to get out of bed in a few days. Consort Yu was overjoyed and rewarded the imperial physician. She ordered someone to prepare a tonic soup. Mingchen Hall was immediately thrown into confusion, but everyone was happy. However, Xiao Ran was not happy. When he woke up, he took advantage of his mother's absence to ask Xiangyu about what had happened in the past few days. Xiangyu told him everything about his royal highness. Xiao Ran could no longer sit still. At this time, Consort Yu came in. Seeing that he was about to get out of bed, she immediately stopped him. "Your injuries haven't healed yet. Why are you in such a hurry to get out of bed?" "Mother, eldest brother is innocent. I want to explain to Imperial Father that it was someone else who tried to assassinate I." Xiao Ran struggled to get out of bed, but unexpectedly heard his mother's cold order. "Someone come. Close the doors to the hall. Don't let the fourth prince take a single step out." "Mother, what are you doing?" Xiao Ran was stunned. He only heard his mother say in a voice that only he could hear, "Silly child, this is a rare opportunity. If you don't get rid of the King of England with your abilities, it will be too difficult for you to compete with him." Xiao Ran stared dumbfoundedly at his mother, who was usually gentle, but now had an expression that he couldn't see clearly. "Mother, this son has never thought of competing with eldest imperial brother. It's not important whether you want to or not. There will come a day when someone will force you to go on stage even if you don't want to." Consort Yu looked into his eyes and said with a serious expression. But Xiao Ran could not accept it. "Be good. Don't you like that little girl from the Chu family? Imperial concubine mother promises that once this matter is over, I will take her to be your concubine or concubine, as long as you are happy." Imperial concubine Moon gently stroked his head as she spoke in a gentle voice. Xiao Ran was a little tempted when he heard this, but he quickly overturned this idea. Taking advantage of someone in a perilous situation was against the morals of a person. He shook his head and said firmly, "The saint said that there are things that a gentleman should do and things that he should not do. Imperial mother, please let I go see Imperial father." "No, put away your saintly words. Mother will not agree to this. If you dare to take a single step out of Mingchen Hall, everyone here will be beheaded." After speaking, Consort Yu ordered the guards to increase the security, then left angrily. Xiao Ran clutched the wound on his chest as he lay on the bed and stared blankly at the ceiling. Why did everything become like this? His eldest brother was his closest brother. How could he sit by and do nothing? How did Imperial concubine mother become like this? How was he going to face Qingyin in the future? Xiao Ran's face was filled with despair. When Chu Qingyin, who was leaning against the wall, heard her father's words, her heart was moved. A prison break. It wasn't that she hadn't thought of it before. Moreover, she had said in front of Big Ice Cube that if all their methods were useless, then she would bring people to break the prison. Seeing the figure hanging down beside her, Chu Qingyin did not even turn her head as she asked, "The worst plan is to break the prison. What are the chances of success?" 80%. Ling jumped down from the wall and replied without asking anything. Add another 10%. Turin walked out and followed up, unless there's a 10% chance. Chu Qingyin suddenly felt a bit proud, a bit gratified, a bit emotional, a bit regretful, and a bit moved. He was proud that Big Ice Cube had such elites under his command. He was gratified that Big Ice Cube had fierce cavalry by his side all these years. He was moved that he was able to meet them, but regretted that Big Ice Cube was not able to use him. He was moved by the deep friendship between them. Unless it's the last moment, we definitely won't use this method. Once they broke the prison, Big Ice Cube's reputation would be ruined, and he would have to admit that she was the mastermind behind the scenes. It would also determine his life as a fugitive. She would not allow Big Ice Cube to live the rest of his life like this. Turin and Ling nodded. They had thought of this method before, but they were more worried about their master's attitude. Hearing the little princess say this, the two of them let out a sigh of relief. Chu Qingyin leaned against the wall and thought. She thought of what Yao Yingrua said today, and a spark suddenly flashed in her mind. She clapped her hands and thought of an idea. That's right. Is there anyone that His Majesty respects, or someone that His Majesty would listen to, or someone that he would give some face to? Today, she had begged Empress Liang, begged Sichuan Emperor, begged Consort Yu. But she had received nothing in the end. It was better to rely on herself than on others. She would find a method herself and save Big Ice Cube herself. Although she still had to ask for help in the end, she still had a high chance of winning. Ling and Turin were stunned when they heard this. Someone that His Majesty respected? Someone that His Majesty would listen to? Someone that His Majesty would give some face to? Wasn't that the retired emperor? Little princess, the retired emperor. If it's the retired emperor, he will definitely save Master. Ling was a little excited. They had truly become muddle-headed. How could they forget such an important savior like the retired emperor? Turin nodded in agreement. Chu Qingyin's eyes lit up. That was the retired emperor that pointed her out to Big Ice Cube? All right, Turin, continue to investigate the whereabouts of that assassin. Ling, inform Water Spirit that she must find traces of the retired emperor. The two sides will work together and try to make progress in 3 days. Although she had not eaten for a day, it did not affect her excitement. If the news of Big Ice Cube being imprisoned was spread, then the retired emperor would definitely come back if he heard about it. She hoped that the retired emperor would really pity Big Ice Cube. The Earth Spirit and the Fire Spirit immediately accepted the order and left. Their footsteps also became much lighter. Although the retired emperor's whereabouts were uncertain and Master had not heard any news about him, if they used all the manpower and resources of the valiant cavalry and dug 3 feet into the ground, they did not believe that they would not be able to find him. At this time, Father Chu, who had skipped away, came back. At the same time, he brought back a message from Mother Chu, telling her to go back to the courtyard to eat. Chu Qingyin also had a bit of appetite at this time. She was about to leave with her father when she saw someone rushing over. Little princess, there is an old beggar outside. He is hanging around the door and won't leave, saying that our king's palace owes him a meal. Normally, this kind of beggar was not uncommon, but this was the first time he had seen such a righteous person. If this was a normal time, he would just give him a meal, but this person was asking for a yard after getting an inch. He said that he wanted to have dinner with the king's palace's master. Otherwise, he would not eat. This person must have come to find trouble, but recently, something had happened in the palace. The guards did not dare to blatantly chase him away, fearing that they would give him a reason. However, it was not good to have someone hanging around the door, so housekeeper Bai immediately sent him to ask the little princess. Chu Qingyin did not think that there would be such a strange thing. She was thinking about how to deal with it, but she saw her father excitedly running out of the palace, saying that he wanted to see this old beggar. Chu Qingyin held her forehead and could only support her body to slowly walk over. Then she would also go and see this person. Chapter 151. The moment Chu Qingyin stepped out of the door, she saw her father squatting at the side. In front of him sat a white-haired, old man dressed in rags. His face was covered in mud, and so were his clothes. They were all over the place, and it was impossible to tell the original state of his clothes. White Tiger stood at the side. When he saw the young princess consort come out, he respectfully said, "Young princess consort, this is the old beggar who refused to leave." Chu Qingyan nodded. "You can go and attend to your own matters first." White Tiger acknowledged and left. When she had entered the Fu, this White Tiger had made things difficult for her. But in the past few days, perhaps he had seen that the situation had changed, so he was even more respectful towards her. She could not find a single mistake in the way he did things. Presumably, he was also afraid that she would take the opportunity to make things difficult for him. Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes. She did not have so much free time to take revenge on others. Chu Qingyan walked in front of the two people who were staring at each other. She did not look at the old man anymore, but asked, "Old Grandpa, is there anything that you need that the King of England's Fu can help you with?" Perhaps this person was here to find trouble, but an old man should take care of other people's elders. Chu Qingyan had always been respectful towards the elderly. That old man had already seen Chu Qingyan come out. He sized her up from the corner of his eyes. She was steady and virtuous, with a pretty appearance. He was quite satisfied in his heart. Seeing her attitude towards the steward, he was even more satisfied. It seemed that she could already make decisions in the King of England's Fu. This old man knows fortune-telling. His voice was loud and clear, full of energy. Chu Qingyan blushed with shame. Could it be that another quack had come? "We don't need fortune-telling." The old man did not seem to hear her reply and continued, "Your Fu is in big trouble and needs the help of an important person." Chu Qingyan instantly narrowed her eyes. The person she had asked Turin and Hualing to find was someone who could save the big ice cube. She could not help but ask, "Who is the important person that the old man is referring to?" The old man stroked his tangled beard, then stood up. He was a few heads taller than Chu Qingyan. Even if he lost, he did not lose. Chu Qingyan took a few steps back, trying not to look up at him. Seeing her small movements, the old man did not care. He stretched his hands and waved at her casually. "This old man wants to bathe, eat, and rest." "Okay." Chu Qingyan did not hesitate. Xining was shocked by her master's forthright attitude. The old man gave Chu Qingyan a look that said, "At least you know how to behave," then casually walked into the Fu. Chu Qingyan instructed Xining to order people to prepare. Chu Qingyan watched the old man leisurely walk into the Fu with his hands behind his back. Although he looked a little funny, she could not laugh. At this time, her father came over and said uncertainly, "Kai, I think I've seen this person somewhere before, but I can't remember where." She slightly curled her lips when she heard that, then said to her father, "Maybe we've found our savior this time." When Father Chu heard that, he was a little confused. Chu Qingyan did not care about anything else and immediately brought her father into the Fu. The old man wanted to bathe, so Chu Qingyan ordered people to bring him to the room. But not long after, Hongi came to report that the old man's clothes were freshly made. He wanted the most expensive spices to bathe, and he also wanted people to help him bathe. He wanted this and that. Even the head of the inner courtyard, Hong Yi, had a headache because of him. As if she had expected this person to be so difficult. Chu Qingyan only smiled when she heard that, satisfy whatever he wants. If the food does not have it, send people to buy it. Don't let him wait too long. Hong Yi was a little confused, but still went to do as she was told. Chu Qingyan stood outside the room and watched as buckets of black water were sent out. The corners of her eyes twitched. How many days had it been since he last bathed? An hour later, the door to the room was pushed open, and a noble old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion walked out. His head of messy white hair had been tied up high, and he looked neat and tidy from head to toe. At this moment, he was stroking his smooth beard, and the corners of his mouth curled up in satisfaction. When Chu Qingyan saw him, he looked just like an old urchin. Kai, clothes make the man, and gold make the Buddha, right? Father Chu said with a wink. Chu Qingyan nodded, and at this moment, the old man had already walked in front of her and was shouting, "Rice, rice, rice, this old man wants to eat." The moment he spoke, his noble aura was gone, and he only gave off the feeling of an old grandpa next door. Chu Qingyan laughed in spite of herself, and raised her hands to bow. "This way, please." Huang Yi had always been fast at preparing food. When Chu Qingyin entered the drawing room, the table was already filled with all kinds of delicacies. The old man entered the drawing room and saw the table full of dishes. His eyes flashed, and he casually asked, "Did you make all these dishes?" "No, my family's maidservant made them." Chu Qingyin did not understand why he would ask this, but she still answered honestly. However, the old man's expression immediately changed. "I'm not eating. You don't have any sincerity at all." Chu Qingyin rolled her eyes at the ceiling. Could it be that he wanted to eat the food she made? Hualing had just returned when he heard that someone had come to the food to cause trouble. When he walked into the drawing room, he heard that the other party wanted the young princess to cook, and he instantly flew into a rage. When he rushed over to drag the person out, he was stopped by his young princess. She mysteriously shook her head at him, and then calmly turned around to say to the old man, "Old grandpa, my family's maidservant is very good at cooking. I guarantee that you will want a second meal after the first. My cooking isn't good, but if you really want to eat, I can make some pastries for you. Right now, you're also hungry, so don't fuss over this. Otherwise, it won't be good if you get a stomachache. What do you think?" The old man looked at the fragrant dishes on the table and was a bit moved. Seeing that he was wavering, Chu Qingyin did not wait for him to reply and said, "Then eat something light to fill your stomach first, and then eat the fish." Hearing this faintly concerned tone, the old man looked at her with an unreadable expression. He then pretended to be impatient as he said, "Go, go. So long-winded." Chu Qingyin smiled, and then ordered Hong Yi and Xining to take care of the good man. She went down to prepare the pastries. When she returned to the drawing room with the pastries, there was only a mess of cups and plates left on the table. Chu Qingyin looked at the two large felines caressing their stomachs, and her eyes couldn't help but twitch. The old man saw her come in and complained, "Good dishes go with good wine. Why didn't you prepare wine for this old man?" Chu Qingyin put down the pastries and said with a serious expression, "You shouldn't drink wine on an empty stomach. It's harmful to the body." The old man rubbed his nose and snorted, "You really care too much." At this time, receiving the news that the Emperor Emeritus had entered the city, Turin immediately rushed into the Fu. He wanted to tell the young princess this great news, but when he stepped into the drawing room and saw the person sitting there, he immediately knelt down with a plop. "Emperor Emeritus is well." Emperor Emeritus? Everyone present was shocked at first, and then they all knelt down in a panic. Only Chu Qingyin had a smile on her lips as she slowly bent down. Chapter 152. The Emperor Emeritus stroked his beard, looking down in satisfaction at the flustered crowd below, but when he saw that small figure, he raised his brows. "Yin Lass, you recognized us long ago?" Upon hearing the words Yin Lass, Chu Qingyin knew that she had passed his test. She immediately raised her head and replied, reporting to Imperial Grandfather. Qingyin wasn't very sure at the beginning. The moment she finished speaking, the Emperor Emeritus's hearty laughter was heard. "You're indeed the granddaughter-in-law that I chose." Chu Qingyin blushed with shame. "If it weren't for you, this old swindler, she wouldn't be living in this abyss of suffering and politics." Imperial Grandfather. "Then what about His Highness?" Chu Qingyin didn't mince her words and directly asked. Anyway, since this Emperor Emeritus appeared here at this time, it proved that he had the intention to save the big ice cube. The Emperor Emeritus looked at her in dissatisfaction. "You let us eat and drink to our fill, and now you intend to use us?" Chu Qingyin coughed lightly, not wanting to admit it. When the Emperor Emeritus saw this, he waved his hand and stood up. Not going. Us hasn't rested yet. It's not like that rascal hasn't suffered before. The imperial prison is nothing to him, and he won't die even if he stays in there for another day. Where's us room?" Chu Qingyin felt that this Emperor Emeritus was really willful, but he was the most senior. Moreover, she could hear that he was intimate with the big ice cube from his words. Chu Qingyin's heart relaxed, and she didn't harp on this matter anymore. She instructed people to prepare a good room and had someone bring him down. Seeing that her father wanted to follow, Chu Qingyin hurriedly pulled him back. "Father, you should also go bathe and rest. It's getting late." Father Chu rubbed his round belly, feeling that his daughter's suggestion was very good. Thus, he pulled out the large knife at his waist and placed it in his daughter's hand. "If that Emperor Emeritus wants to break the prison, give this large knife to him. I've sharpened it very well." Chu Qingyin held the large knife that had been sharpened to the point that it was hard to tell which was the blade and which was the back. She wanted to cry, but had no tears as she nodded. The night passed. After Chu Qingyin finished washing up, she heard Hong Yi report that the Emperor Emeritus had entered the palace early in the morning. Chu Qingyin smiled when she heard this. It seemed that Imperial Grandfather was even more anxious than her. The Sichuan Emperor had just finished his morning court session. As soon as he walked into the imperial study, he saw a figure casually sitting in his seat. He was about to get angry, but when he saw who was sitting there, he couldn't believe it. "Father, why are you back?" The retired emperor, who had closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep, raised his head and shot him a glance. "Not coming back? Don't tell me that my grandson is being wrongly accused by you?" "Father," Sichuan Emperor smiled awkwardly. Seeing him like this, the retired emperor immediately became angry. "Kneel down." Sichuan Emperor was a little embarrassed, but he still knelt down in fear of his father's majesty. As soon as he knelt down, the official documents on the table fell with a clatter. Sichuan Emperor didn't dare to resist, so he could only accept it. "You unfilial son, I gave you the country, gave you the throne, gave you power, and you tossed it around like this? Do you know how much I suffered this time? In order to rush back, I didn't eat my fill for 3 days, slept in the open, and didn't even take a bath. You unfilial son, how can you face me like this?" The retired emperor scolded as he smashed the documents. Sichuan Emperor wanted to cry, but had no tears. It turned out that his father was complaining that he made his father suffer. "Father, don't smash anymore. In any case, I am the ruler of a country. Let I get up first." Hearing this, the retired emperor raised his eyebrows. "You can't stand kneeling like this? Then why didn't you think about whether Su, and granddaughter-in-law would be able to stand it when they were kneeling?" Sichuan Emperor's expression changed slightly. The retired emperor didn't want to make things difficult for him anymore, so he casually waved his hand to let him get up. "You've been idling about all day long. Instead of studying the state affairs, you only think about those useless things. Sooner or later, Su, such a well-behaved prince, will also be tormented by you. When that time comes, you'll cry." The retired emperor scolded fiercely. Sichuan Emperor didn't say a word. He wasn't as unbearable as his father made him out to be. Moreover, he didn't think that Sichuan would be affected without Su. However, he didn't dare to say these words in front of his father. After venting his anger, the retired emperor stood up and looked at Sichuan Emperor. "All right, heaven's secrets can't be revealed, so I won't say anything more. If you don't release Su, I won't acknowledge you as my son." "I understand." Sichuan Emperor could only agree. In the deep and serene prison, Xiao Su couldn't help but frown when he heard the prison door open and eunuch Xiao walk in. "His Royal Highness, His Majesty invites you in." Xiao Su agreed. They left the prison and entered the imperial palace. When Xiao Su saw the person sitting on the throne, he bowed and knelt down to pay his respects. "Greetings, Imperial Father." Sichuan Emperor sized up the person on the ground. His entire body was cold. A few days in prison didn't dampen his spirit at all. Sichuan Emperor moved his lips. His forehead still hurt from being hit by his father, so he spoke insincerely. "I've wronged you these past few days." Xiao Su's eyes moved, and he replied in a low voice, "Imperial Father, you're exaggerating." Sichuan Emperor was instantly disappointed. This child never acted coquettishly or spoke softly to him. He was too different from Ranner. This son of his had never been close to him. Sichuan Emperor put away his self-blame and sat upright in his seat, regaining the imposing manner of an emperor. "The real mastermind behind the assassination of your fourth imperial brother has been found. After investigation, it's confirmed that it has nothing to do with you. You can rest assured." Xiao Su frowned slightly. What happened these past few days that made Imperial Father change his mind? That's right. He didn't believe that with that person's methods, Imperial Father would be able to find the real culprits so quickly. Therefore, this mastermind was probably just a scapegoat. Many thanks, Imperial Father, for proving Ai's innocence. Xiao Su replied respectfully without a trace of grievance or dissatisfaction. Sichuan Emperor nodded in satisfaction, then said, "Since that's the case, Imperial Father has something for you to do." "Please speak, Imperial Father," Xiao Su replied. "Yesterday, scouts reported that they found traces of ore in the Fu Li mountain range. Imperial Father wants to send you to verify it. If it's true, then Sichuan's military strength will increase by another level," Sichuan Emperor said seriously as he stroked his beard. Xiao Su's eyes suddenly darkened, and then became as deep as the night. However, he quickly cupped his hands and replied, "I will obey." "Good, but I have other things to tell you on the way," Sichuan Emperor said in a good mood. "I'll do as Imperial Father says," Xiao Su said indifferently. That day, the King of England, Xiao Su, and Sichuan Emperor spent an entire day in the Imperial study, but no one knew what they talked about. When the Imperial study opened, Xiao Su walked out into the sunlight. However, the warm light couldn't illuminate the desolation in his heart. "I will postpone the appointment of the Crown Prince. You can go in peace." He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to return from this trip. "Mine? Secret mission?" Xiao Su laughed self-deprecatingly. He increasingly felt that this palace was cold and unfamiliar. Chapter 153. Reporting to Master, His Royal Highness has been released. The man in black bowed respectfully as he reported. Standing in front of him was the sickly third prince, Xiao Ho, holding fish food in one hand and feeding the goldfish in the pond. Xiao Ho was dressed in a snow-white prince's brocade robe. It was clearly early autumn, but he was covered with a large coat, making him look even paler. If Chu Qingyan saw him, she would definitely think that he was a sickly beauty with a beauty that could captivate even the birds and beasts. Hearing his subordinate's report, Xiao Ho smiled disapprovingly. "I already guessed it after you failed to assassinate fourth brother. It's this subordinate's fault for not being able to complete the mission." The man in black knelt and blamed himself. Xiao Ho raised his hand. "You have already received your punishment, but you accidentally caused eldest brother to lose trust in Imperial Father. I'm afraid that the gap between eldest brother and fourth brother, and between consort you and the Empress, will become bigger and bigger. I'm happy to see this happen." The man in black nodded and asked, "Then, Master, His Majesty sent the eldest prince to investigate the mines in Fu Li mountain range. Do we need to act?" Xiao Ho smiled faintly. "Do you really think that Fu Li mountain range is a mining trip? That's just Imperial Father's scheme. Sometimes I also sympathize with eldest brother. Imperial Father was just indifferent to him. But towards eldest brother, he was pressuring him step by step. He suddenly had some expectations. What kind of changes would there be in the future?" The man in black was somewhat puzzled. Xiao Ho felt that there was no need to explain to his subordinate. "Suppress all actions for now and wait for changes." "Yes." The man in black retreated. Xiao Ho lowered his head to look at the goldfish swimming freely in the pond, revealing a faint sneer. "Death is at hand, and you still don't know?" He casually threw the fish food in his hand into the pond, and the school of fish swarmed over to snatch it. Xiao Ho smiled cruelly, then turned and left. Soon after, white bellies floated up from the fish pond one after another. "Slaughter them all." In the house of the King of England, Chu Qingyan was restless. From time to time, she would go out to take a look and then come back, waiting anxiously. I say, Yin lass, don't keep swaying in front of this old man. This old man's eyes are about to blossom from being swayed by you." The retired emperor held a pastry in one hand and a teacup in the other. His mouth was full of pastry crumbs as he muttered. Chu Qingyan shook his head. "I'm just worried. I can't sit still." The retired emperor rolled his eyes and turned to ask Father Chu, "Huai Yuan, I can understand why your daughter is walking around, but why are you following her blindly?" Mr. Chu scratched his head. "I'm also worried that my family won't be able to sit still." The retired emperor spat out all the pastries in his mouth. What was that? He imagined his tall and strong grandson being turned into a green onion. That scene was so beautiful that he didn't dare to imagine it. Yin lass, this old man already told you that his highness will be released today. Just wait patiently. If you have nothing to do, go make a few plates of pastries for this old man. The egg yolk and green tea tart from last night were pretty good. Make a few more plates. Thinking of the pastries that he had never seen last night, he couldn't help but drool. Chu Qingyin's eyes lit up as if she had seen something. She casually replied, I'm afraid that Qingyin doesn't have time. With that, she ran forward like a wisp of smoke. The retired emperor slapped the table. This lass was too impudent. But before he could reprimand her, she had already disappeared. He couldn't help but ask Father Chu, what's wrong? Where did she run off to again? You want to pick up my family, Mr. Chu said with a grin. Then why didn't you go? The retired emperor asked in confusion, who knew that as soon as he finished speaking, Father Chu rolled his eyes. I don't want to be a lantern. What do you mean? The retired emperor felt that sometimes he couldn't understand what this father and daughter were talking about. Could it be that he had been away from the capital for too long and couldn't keep up with the changes? You're a third wheel, but you won't understand even if I tell you. Father Chu waved his hand and walked into the inner courtyard with his hands behind his back. I'm going to tell Dan Yang that my son-in-law is back. The retired emperor rubbed his nose, his expression gloomy. This father and daughter were too impudent. Didn't they see that he was the retired emperor? He fiercely took a bite of the pastry. He must get his grandson to uphold justice for him. On the other side, Chu Qingyin ran off and threw herself into a sturdy embrace. Smelling the faint scent of ink and the faint warmth of the embrace, the tears that she had been holding back trickled down. It wasn't until this moment that she dared to relax and believe that everything wasn't a dream. The ice cube was really back. As soon as Xiao Su entered the door, he heard a voice rushing towards him from afar. When he saw clearly who it was, he couldn't help but stop in his tracks. He opened his arms with a smile on the corners of his mouth as he welcomed the little fellow who was rushing towards him menacingly. When the person crashed into his embrace, he was slightly stunned, as if something had touched the depths of his soul. His fingers trembled slightly, and he felt as if he was holding the most precious treasure in the world. He lowered his brows, clenched his hands, and chuckled softly. The emptiness in his chest for the past few days was finally filled up. His longing was fulfilled at this moment. It turned out that he had always been longing for the person in his arms. There was no one else. Big Ice Cube, I've been very obedient at home. I didn't do anything to make you angry. Chu Qingyin said in a choked voice. You really didn't? He caressed her head, his soft voice carrying a hint of disbelief. Chu Qingyin immediately shook her head. No, waiting for you was the only thing I could do. I swear. His heart trembled slightly. The warm tears of the person buried in his chest seemed to flow into his heart, warming his heart with an irresistible heat. For the first time in so many years, he felt that returning home meant something to him. Is that so? His voice trembled. You didn't eat properly, you didn't rest properly, and you still dare to say that you didn't make this prince angry? When she ran over, he had already seen the dark circles under her eyes. When he hugged her, he could clearly feel that she had lost a lot of weight, but she also seemed to have grown a little taller. Hearing this, Chu Qingyin stuck out her tongue and wiped all her tears on his clothes without any restraint. She rolled her large eyes and said, Isn't it all your fault? It's all your fault for making me worry. Still twisting words and forcing logic? Who was the one who said that the body is the capital of a revolution? Without capital, how can a revolution be made? Xiao Su raised his brows and mocked. When Chu Qingyin heard this, she buried her face in his chest and compromised. All right, I was wrong. Now that you're back, I'll eat properly and rest properly. I guarantee that I'll grow white and fat. Only then was Xiao Su satisfied. Reporting to Master, this subordinate didn't see anything. Hualing, who had been watching for an unknown amount of time, covered his eyes with his hands, revealing the gaps between his fingers. Let's go. Turin slightly turned his body, but his gaze was still on the two of them. "Let's go." Wood Spirit and Ethereal stood under the tree and said with smiles. Chapter 154. Only then did Chu Qingyan realize that she couldn't control herself, and she was like a little child in the big ice cube's embrace. Sometimes she started to wonder if she had really gotten used to her identity as a 10-year-old. Was that why she was so shamelessly throwing herself at the big ice cube? Realizing this, Chu Qingyan blushed and jumped out of the big ice cube's embrace. She pointed at the spirits beside her and rolled her eyes. "You peeping Toms, little princess consort, we guarantee that we really didn't see anything," Ling said with a sneaky smile. Wood Spirit, Turin, and Ethereal all chimed in. Chu Qingyan was gloomy. Xiao Su raised his hand to pat the little fellow's fuming little head and lightly reprimanded his subordinates. "All right, stop fooling around." The four spirits looked at each other. "Look, Master is starting to protect the little princess consort again." However, they all had a tacit understanding. Standing in a row, they changed from their previous laziness and solemnly bowed. "Welcome back to the Fu, Master." Xiao Su's brows couldn't help but soften, and the little fellow standing beside him held his hand. The coldness from the depths of the palace was slowly dispelled. "Imperial Grandfather is in the Fu. Do you want to go see him?" Chu Qingyan raised her head to ask. Amen. Xiao Su understood. If Imperial Grandfather hadn't appeared, this prison sentence would have been far in the future. His expression darkened slightly, but it wasn't noticed because it was hidden by the mask. And Chu Qingyan only felt that the big ice cube's hand seemed to have become much colder. She instantly gripped him harder, wanting to give him her own warmth. But when they returned to the hall, they only left behind a table full of pastry crumbs and empty plates. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but ask Huang Yi, who was cleaning up, "Where's Emperor Emeritus?" He went to the side courtyard with eldest Lord Chu. He said he wanted to compete who could shoot further. Because her lord had returned, Huang Yi's tone was filled with joy. Chu Qingyan face-bombed. These two old urchins, their ages added together, were almost 100 years old, yet they were still jumping around. Big Ice Cube said, "Grandpa Emperor is unruly. Let him be." Chu Qingyan immediately nodded. "I've already asked Hong Yi to arrange hot water for you. Go take a bath and wash away the bad luck. I'll hold a welcoming dinner for you tonight." Xiao Su didn't think that in just a few days she would be able to take charge of the household. From the steward's tone towards her, as well as the servant's orderly behavior during his absence, it could be seen that her position in the household was slowly taking root. He was still slightly surprised by her growth, but on second thought, he was ultimately stronger than ordinary people. Thus, he didn't say anything else and turned around to take a shower. After he took a shower and changed into casual clothes, he saw the little fellow who was about to go out with her blanket. He frowned slightly. "Come here." Chu Qingyan heard his voice and turned around. Although she didn't know why the big ice cube called her, she still walked over obediently. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I heard that in order to avoid bad luck, the clothes and blankets in the room have to be changed. I'll help you take the blankets out." Chu Qingyan didn't think there was a problem and replied. Xiao Su frowned. "Put it down and let the servants take care of it. Then sit down." Thinking that the big ice cube had something to say to her, she immediately put down the blankets in her hands and sat down on the chaise lounge in front of him. She asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Xiao Su didn't answer. He squatted down in front of her and lifted her skirt without any explanation. She was stunned and immediately raised her hand to stop him. She said with a stupefied expression, "Big Ice Cube, what are you doing?" Although she struggled a little, her strength was as small as an ant to him. He easily lifted her skirt and revealed her two white and tender lotus-like calves. Because she had to apply medicine these few days, she had specially asked Xining to cut her trousers to her knees so that it would be easier to apply medicine. Thus, Xiao Su saw the bloody wound at a glance. Although she had already applied medicine yesterday, even the best medicine needed time to heal. Xiao Su's eyes darkened. He had been through hundreds of battles and had suffered many injuries in his life. With one look, he knew where it came from. "You enter the palace?" Xiao Su looked at the person above him with deep eyes. She had thought that the big ice cube was going to do something to her, but it was only because he was suspicious of her inconvenient legs. She thought that she had pretended well, but unfortunately, she still couldn't escape his eyes. However, Chu Qingyan still secretly despised her own bad thoughts. "Yes, but it's fine now. It doesn't hurt anymore," Chu Qingyan replied with a smile. Looking at the person who was lying through her teeth, Xiao Su raised his hand and gently pressed it. He heard the sound of sobbing above him and stood up. "Where is the medicine?" Chu Qingyan grimaced in pain. The big ice cube really didn't know how to be gentle with a woman. She pursed her lips and pointed at the cabinet. Xiao Su turned around and came back with a bottle of medicine. Then he sat down on the couch and gently lifted her legs to rest on his lap. Chu Qingyan was shocked. Was the big ice cube planning to apply the medicine for her personally? Although it was the big ice cube who applied the medicine for her before, she didn't know why she was a little bashful at this moment. She didn't know what was wrong with her. No need. I'll do it myself," Chu Qingyan said as she wanted to take the medicine bottle from the big ice cube's hand. "Don't move." Xiao Su glanced at her and then lowered his head to apply the medicine for her seriously. The ice-cold medicine was applied to her sore knees, alleviating a lot of the pain. She looked at the big ice cube who was seriously applying the medicine for her and suddenly felt that it was a bit inconceivable. He should be a proud son of heaven, a war god that everyone knew, but he was willing to do something that didn't match his status. However, he was so calm as if it was a normal thing. Her heart felt like it had been lightly touched by someone. It felt a bit itchy and an indescribable throbbing. She thought of something and said to the serious person, "Big ice cube, I shouldn't have lost my temper with you in the imperial prison. I apologize." Xiao Su's lips curled slightly and he looked up to tease her. "Where's the stubbornness you had when you were angry with this prince?" "I wasn't angry. I was a bit angry at that time. Who told you to think that you had a way out for me? I wouldn't have agreed," Chu Qingyan said righteously. Xiao Su's hand paused when he heard this and a complicated emotion flashed through his eyes. Right now, she was unhappy because of his arrangements, so he had to convince her to accept the arrangements he had for her. Chu Qingyan felt that something was wrong with his absent-mindedness. She was about to ask him about it when someone knocked on the door. Xiao Su put down her clothes and said, "Come in." Gu Rong entered and reported, "Lord, the fourth prince has come to the residence to request an audience." Xiao Su stood up when he heard this. "Bring him to the guest room." After saying this, Xiao Su turned around and reminded her, "Don't run around. Be careful of your wound." Chu Qingyan nodded and forgot what she wanted to ask as she watched him leave. However, she faintly felt that there was something wrong with the big ice cube's return this time. However, she didn't know what was wrong, and she was a bit confused. Chapter 155. Xiao Su entered the drawing room and saw the pale-faced Xiao Ran sitting in the chair. He couldn't help but frown and scolded, "You're seriously injured. Instead of resting in the palace, you're running around. Are you tired of living?" Xiao Ran, who had been worried that his eldest brother would be angry at him, heard the long-awaited scolding. His eyes burned, and he blurted out, "Eldest brother, this subject brother didn't deliberately not come out to clear your name. It was, this subject brother couldn't help it. I'm really sorry." Seeing him blame himself and be hurt, Xiao Su sighed in his heart. "This matter has nothing to do with you. You don't have to blame yourself. Eldest brother, as princes, do we have to be forced to kill each other for that position?" Xiao Ran suddenly had the urge to pour out his heart. During this period of time, he had been lying in bed, his heart full of confusion and fear for the future. But he didn't know who to say it to. Only now did he find an outlet to pour it out. "Eldest brother, I'm afraid that in the end, I'll become the kind of person I hate." Xiao Su reached out to pat his shoulder and said sincerely, "Guard your heart. Then you can maintain your original heart." Xiao Ran's eyes reddened, but he knew that he was a man. A man didn't cry easily, so he could only endure it. This subject brother will remember eldest brother's teachings. "Go back. Don't make people worry." Xiao Su said lightly. Xiao Ran nodded. Before leaving, he turned his head and said, I snuck out of the palace. I can't stay for too long. Eldest brother, help me say sorry to Qin Yin. If it wasn't for him, Qin Yin wouldn't have knelt for so many hours to plead for leniency. After Xiao Ran left, a pair of black gold boots appeared at the door. Her white eyebrows were slightly raised. Your imperial father didn't hesitate to make things difficult for you because of him. His imperial mother is always against you. It's rare for you to treat him with such sincerity. It's rare for the imperial family to have such a kind heart. Hearing the pity in his imperial grandfather's words, Xiao Su calmly replied, Grandson is just following his own heart. I can't be considered kind. TSK, TSK, TSK. Grandpa, I didn't think that after going through so many things, you would still be so respectful and filial. The retired emperor walked into the hall, shaking his head as he spoke. His tone was somewhat incredulous, but he felt that it was reasonable. He still had some understanding of this imperial grandson of his. Isn't it all because of imperial grandfather's teachings? What's more, fourth imperial brother is also your imperial grandson. Xiao Su handed him a cup of tea and calmly retorted. The retired emperor suddenly widened his eyes. Have you been with Yin Las for so long that you've also learned to contradict me? Xiao Su didn't pay attention to his imperial grandfather's intermittent strangeness. He calmly said, Qin Yin is still young. There are some things that she didn't do well. Please forgive her, imperial grandfather. You haven't even married into the family, yet you're already siding with outsiders. Xiao Su, don't forget that I'm your grandfather. The retired emperor blew his beard and glared. Xiao Su smiled. Grandson also didn't say that you weren't grandfather. Moreover, imperial grandfather, don't forget that this marriage was personally bestowed by you. The retired emperor was stunned. It was indeed bestowed by him. He suddenly felt like he had lifted a rock and smashed it on his own foot. The retired emperor stomped his feet in anger. Why did this good grandson's way of speaking change after being with Yin Las for a period of time? It didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. Xiao Su didn't pay attention to his imperial grandfather stomping his feet. He sat down and picked up the teacup in his hand. His thoughts drifted away. This trip was fraught with danger. How should he tell the little fellow to stay in the residence with peace of mind? No one responded to his monologue for a long time. The retired emperor gloomily glared at him. Then he found a comfortable position to sit down in. His tone also recovered its seriousness and became less frivolous. What did your imperial father call you to the imperial study to talk to you about? Xiao Su pulled back from his contemplation and faintly said, traces of or were found in the Fu Li mountain range. Imperial father asked grandson to investigate. Hearing this, the retired emperor frowned. I've been the emperor for so many years. How come I didn't know that there were ores there? It was discovered recently. Grandson also didn't know. Xiao Su frowned, hiding the faint coldness in his eyes. The retired emperor couldn't figure it out, so he shook his head and continued to ask, it shouldn't be that simple. There should be additional tasks. Xiao Su nodded. He didn't speak bluntly and only praised. Imperial grandfather's guess is very accurate. The retired emperor sighed softly. At this time, he had a dignified aura that came from within. His eyes were sharp, and it was hard to imagine that the old urchin from before was him. How could I not understand my son? After so many years, he still hasn't changed. He's obstinate and doesn't listen to others. Forget it, forget it. One is my son and the other is my grandson. They can do whatever they want. I can't control them. I can't control them. The retired emperor had a helpless expression. Xiao Su stood up and bowed to appease him. Imperial grandfather, your son and grandson have their own fortune. You can relax and live the life you want. The retired emperor jumped up when he heard this. His beard trembled in anger. You dare say it like it's not you. I hope that when I return to the capital in the future, I won't have to collect your corpse. I won't play with you anymore. I'm going to find Huai Yuan. Humph. Xiao Su helplessly shook his head when he heard this. After a while, Huling and Turin entered the study. They immediately saw their master standing in front of the window with his back to them. "Master, are you really going to the Fu Li mountain range?" Huling couldn't control his temper and took the lead to ask. Master had just stepped out of the Imperial Palace when the news came out. Water Spirit immediately passed the news to them when she received it. Master had just been released from prison, and His Majesty had sent him to the Fu Li mountain range to find that ghost mine. From an outsider's point of view, they would think that Master was the mastermind behind the assassination. However, His Majesty saw that Master was a prince and couldn't bear to offend him. He found a reason to release Master. Moreover, right now was the time when the Crown Prince was being discussed. If Master was far away from the capital, wouldn't he not have a chance to compete? It's hard to disobey the imperial order. Xiao Su turned around and looked at his angry subordinate as he lightly spoke. This, Huling opened his mouth. In the end, he gritted his teeth and lowered his head. Even Master couldn't disobey the imperial order. What right did they have to say anything? Turin raised his head to look at his cold master and asked in confusion, "Master, according to Water Spirit's investigation, the Fu Li mountain range stretches for thousands of li and is uninhabited. People have gone to investigate before, but they didn't find any traces of ore. Therefore, this subordinate is worried that this mission will be difficult to carry out. Everything depends on effort. Moreover, this mine search is only one of the missions. There are other secret orders. Go and prepare. In 3 days, we will set out." Xiao Su frowned as he spoke. His gaze was a bit complicated. "Yes," Turin and Huling responded. However, before they left, Turin turned around and asked hesitantly, "Little Princess Consort still doesn't know about this. Should the subordinate inform her?" Xiao Su turned to look outside the window at the bright red lanterns. After being absent-minded for a moment, he slowly said to his subordinate's worried expression, "Go and do your work first. Ben Wang has other arrangements." Chapter 156. When there was no one left in the study, he walked back to his desk and sat down. He picked up a book and opened it, but he couldn't read the words. He still hadn't thought of how to tell her. He closed the book and revealed a bitter smile. Since when did he learn how to care about other people's feelings? Only Xiao Su never would have thought that there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in this world. What should be known would be known. It was only a matter of time. In the main courtyard, Chu Qingyin's heart was filled with joy. The big ice cube had returned safe and sound, so the large stone in her heart had finally fallen. Her parents had already returned to the Chu estate. This time, she cheerfully wanted to go to the study to find the big ice cube. However, after thinking about it, it was almost time for dinner. Perhaps he would return to the courtyard later. Thus, she slyly flew up to a large tree. The dense leaves hid her body, and below was the path to the courtyard. She didn't know if she would suddenly appear in front of the big ice cube later. Would he be startled? Just thinking about it made her excited. Although she subconsciously felt that she was becoming more and more like a child, wasn't being happy the most important thing? She comforted herself. Very soon, someone came over. She immediately held her breath. Turin had taught her how to breathe, making it hard for others to notice her presence. This was the perfect time to use it. But when Chu Qingyin saw who it was, she felt a bit of regret. So it was Turin and Mu Ling. When she was hesitating about whether she should greet them or not, the two of them seemed to be arguing, so they finally stopped under her tree. Chu Qingyin was a little curious as she listened. "Turin, why did you stop me just now?" Ling was a little annoyed. Turin disdained arguing with him. "Master already told you that the imperial order is hard, and you still want to persuade Master not to go. It's better to not do this kind of useless thing." "Go where?" Chu Qingyin was a little confused hearing this. "Turin, why do you think Master won't let the little princess know about this?" Ling leaned against the big tree and no longer argued with Turin. His tone was a bit discouraged, but he couldn't hide the doubt in his eyes. Turin rolled his eyes at him. "It's not that Master doesn't want Xiao Wangfei to know. He's just thinking about how to tell her properly." Ling nodded in agreement. "That's right. Otherwise, if the little princess consort heard that Master wanted to keep her in the palace, she would probably overturn the king's palace. It's possible. Turin shook his head and laughed. The two of them smiled, but after they smiled, a kind of sadness filled their hearts. Why did His Majesty send Master away at this time? The fourth prince was still young. Was he planning to use these few years to nurture the fourth prince's power, and then wait for his master's return to contend against him? Just as the two of them were silent, a figure suddenly descended from the sky. What were you talking about? What do you mean by leaving? What do you mean by keeping me in the Fu? Chu Qingyan frowned, her face showing a calmness that did not match her age. Turin and Hualing looked at each other and didn't say anything. Chu Qingyan bit her lip. Do you think I won't know if you don't say it? At worst, I'll go ask His Highness. Seeing the little princess turn to leave, the two of them compromised and could only tell her everything. The more Chu Qingyan listened, the darker her face became. When she finally heard that the big ice cube had someone hide it from her and was already preparing to leave, her face completely turned black. Hualing rarely saw the little princess' ugly expression, so he coughed lightly to wrap things up. That's how it is. I'll go find His Highness. Chu Qingyan threw down these words after hearing this, and quickly walked towards the study. Hualing poked the person beside him. Say, do you think Master will? When he was leaning against the tree, he felt that there was someone hiding up there. Also, when he heard their conversation, he could guess who it was. So, he gave a look to Turin, and the two of them continued talking. We've already done it. What's the point of worrying about it? Turin rolled his eyes at him. That's right. At worst, I'll just go to the torture room to receive my punishment. I just hope they don't hit me too hard. Otherwise, I'll have to ride a horse. Hualing smiled without caring at all. Turin also smiled when he heard this. Why did they want the little princess to know about this matter? Actually, they didn't understand it themselves. They just felt that with the little princess here, Master would at least live more like them. Chu Qingyan walked towards the study. Her mood went from being angry at being hidden to feeling like she was abandoned. Hearing Turin and Hualing's meaning, the big ice cube's mission this time was very difficult, and the journey was long. He wouldn't be able to come back for at least 2-3 years, but the big ice cube didn't want to bring her along. He wanted her to stay in the palace. Otherwise, he would have already told her. When she walked to the door of the study, her anger had already slowly extinguished, and all that was left was sadness. Did the big ice cube think she would be a burden, so he didn't want to bring her along? She raised her hands, but before she reached the door, she hesitated and stopped. Was she placing too much importance on herself? Was it because she was given a bit of benefit that she wanted a yard after being given an inch? Did she overestimate herself by coming here to question him? However, her heart felt uncomfortable. If she didn't ask for a reason, she wouldn't be satisfied. Her hands used force, and the door to the study was pushed open. The sound was not small and alarmed the person inside. Xiao Su looked up and saw her. When he was about to tell her to knock before entering, he saw her pursing her lips with an angry look on her face. He knit his brows. What happened? She stood at the door, not taking a step. She was afraid that if she moved, the courage in her heart would disappear. She looked up at him and slowly said, Big Ice Cube, why didn't you tell me that you were going to the Fuli mountain range? You knew? He was a bit stunned. Yes, I knew. If I didn't accidentally hear this news, would you still hide it from me and then secretly leave? She became more and more excited as she spoke, so she didn't notice the pity that flashed in his eyes. This prince didn't plan to secretly leave. When the time is right, I will naturally tell you. Xiao Su sighed softly. He didn't expect that she would still find out. This time, it wouldn't be easy to clean up the mess. With her temper, she wouldn't stop until she turned the world upside down. Time? Do I have to wait until the moment before you leave the Fu? She was so angry that she blurted out. It was rare for her to be so aggressive. Xiao Su frowned and looked at her sternly. Qingyan, being scolded by the person in front of her, the last bit of courage in her heart gradually disappeared. Tears streamed down her face. Big Ice Cube, do you not want me anymore? Grief, loss, loneliness, fear. The crying little fellow in front of him seemed to remind him of himself in the past. The sky was filled with fire, and the people around him fell one by one. He looked at the sky in despair. Do you all not want me anymore? When he came back to his senses, he was already hugging the sobbing little fellow. He looked down and saw her tightly clutching his sleeve, as if she was afraid that he would leave just like that. His heart was filled with pity. He was about to speak when he saw her raise her head and speak to him with teary eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to cause trouble for you. I just don't want you to leave me alone." Chapter 157. All of her courage had lost to the inexplicable reluctance in her heart. She didn't care about anything else as she pulled on his sleeve and poured out her shameful thoughts. Time was the greatest magician. It always liked to draw a gap between people that would become bigger and bigger. In the beginning, the two of them could still look at each other, but in the end, they would be separated by the horizon. Once they parted, it would be 3 years and 5 years. If she couldn't follow him, after these years, the friendship that they had worked so hard to build would be slowly eroded by time. She didn't know why she had to follow him to the Fuli mountain range. Along the way, she had asked herself, but her heart didn't have an answer. It only told her that if she went, she would find the answer. If she didn't go, she would only regret it. So, she had to grab onto him and not let him leave her alone. She had finally found someone she was willing to rely on and be with. Whether it was her big brother, her strict father, her close friend, or someone she cared about. She had spent a lot of effort, so how could she let him leave just like that? Xiao Su looked at the little fellow in front of him emotionally. She was like a little kitten that had put away all of her claws. With teary eyes, she pitifully hooked onto him and begged him not to abandon her. He had to admit that his heart was tangled up because of her sadness. He suddenly remembered that every time before he left, the generals under his command would always have a happy and helpless expression as they complained about his family's children crying and shouting to not let him leave. At the time, he didn't think much of it. Now that he was in the same situation, he finally understood this feeling. It was pain and satisfaction. Pain, the separation that was about to happen. He was satisfied with this hard-won and precious friendship. Xiao Su faced this pair of bright and watery eyes. The words of rejection were stuck in his chest, but he couldn't open his mouth. But when he thought about the road he was about to take, he couldn't let his heart soften. "Qin Yan, be good. This king will arrange a good path for you." He held on her hand that was grabbing onto his sleeve, trying to convince her. Actually, at the same time he was convincing her, he was also convincing himself. If it was a normal day, she would have heard that there was something wrong with his words. Why did he want to arrange a path? Isn't the King of England's house the safest place? It wasn't until a long time later when she recalled the conversation that day that she finally realized that he had already seen through the schemes and had only wanted to give her a safe haven. She looked at him and slowly shook her head. Although tears blurred her eyes and she couldn't see the expression of the person in front of her, she still sobbed and said hoarsely, "Don't listen to me. If you listen to me, you won't want me anymore." Her firm tone was choked with sobs. His thin lips were pursed into a line. For the first time, he was helpless against someone. In the military camp, no one dared to disobey his orders. Those who had disagreed with him on the battlefield were no longer around. However, his military tactics were completely useless against the little guy in front of him. Neither beating nor scolding would work. A battle general of a generation, at this moment, was completely helpless against a person who had zero fighting strength. He softened his expression and tried to reason with her. "You should stay in the house. When this king finishes his business, he will quickly return. Don't worry. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. They said that you won't be able to come back in 3 to 5 years. She shook her head. 3 to 5 years. You'll have grown up. How about this king come back and hold a banquet for you? He suddenly remembered that the little guy in front of him would have grown up by then. He didn't know if he could wait until then. His gaze slightly darkened. I don't want to. She shook her head. She didn't want to be separated. She didn't want to wait that long to see him again. What if you see a girl as old as me on the way back and feel pity for her and keep her by your side? When you come back, wouldn't I not even have a place to stand? She continued to spout nonsense. Xiao Su didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This little guy's imagination was too rich. He smiled. You're already noisy enough. This king doesn't have the energy to deal with another one, so you have to believe this king. This king swears to the heavens. Chu Qingyan looked up at the sky. The moon was currently hanging high in the sky. She gave a cold snort. Don't you know that the moon is the most fickle? Every month, it's full or full. Also, do you know why vows are made up of word by word? That's because vows are discounted. You can only listen to half of it and believe half of it. Xiao Su was speechless. Why didn't he feel that this little guy usually had so many fallacious arguments? He pointed outside the door with a headache. He felt that this wasn't the time to talk about this. Calm down first. We'll talk about this tomorrow. He thought that most children were impulsive. After calming down for a night, they would probably change their minds. Chu Qingyan could guess what the ice cube was thinking when she heard this. She couldn't agree. She had to strike while the iron was hot. She had finally managed to move the ice cube, and after a night of cooling down, she wouldn't be able to move him anymore. She rolled her eyes and pretended to nod in agreement. Xiao Su was filled with doubt. Why was she so easily giving in? At this time, he saw the body in front of him tilt and fall to the side. He saw through her trick with a single glance. With a sigh, he grabbed her arm and pulled her back into his embrace. His voice was filled with helplessness and pampering that he didn't notice. What kind of crooked idea are you thinking of now? Nothing, it's just that my leg is numb and my wound hurts a bit. She innocently blinked. Then what about now? He raised his brows as he looked at the person in his embrace. There's no other way. My wound has worsened, and I can't walk anymore. She shrugged. Xiao Su's eyes twitched. When did she learn to act so shamelessly? He had only spent 2 days in the imperial prison, not 2 years. But he quickly calmed down and curled his lips as he looked at her. You can't carry anything with your shoulders and arms. You're so soft when you're injured. How are you going to investigate the mines with this king? Chu Qingyan secretly cursed. She originally wanted to see if he would be soft-hearted and agree to her request. But how did he counterattack when she wasn't paying attention? She immediately struggled to get down and tidied up her sleeves. Then she looked up at him and said with sparkling eyes, I was just joking with you. My body is very good and you don't need to worry about it. So bring me along. Who knows? Maybe you need to carry something heavy and I can even help you. Xiao Su looked at the thin and weak shoulders in front of him. Although she was much taller than when they first met, in his eyes, this girl was still a bit petite. Her eyes that had been washed by tears were like a mirror, reflecting the true emotions in her heart. Xiao Su saw that in her eyes, he was feeling a bit of a headache. Seeing him in a daze, Chu Qingyan couldn't help walking forward to hug him. She didn't have the angry and sad questioning from before, nor did she act shamelessly like before. She only spoke in a soft voice. The King of England's palace is so big. Without you, without Hua Ling and the others, I will be lonely and scared. I just want to stay by your side. I will be very obedient and won't make a fuss. I won't cause trouble for you, all right? Chapter 158. Her voice was soft and coquettish. Xiao Su had to admit that at that moment, his heart seemed to have been hit by something. When he was young, he was the first prince. The people around him only flattered him and were cautious. The moment he put on his mask, everyone avoided him like the plague. Now his status had plummeted and there were only a few people around him. No one had ever used such a determined and timid gaze to express their reluctance to part with him, holding on to him without giving up, crying and saying that they were reluctant to part with him. It had nothing to do with benefits, no purpose, just wanting to stay by his side. At this moment, the wall made of ice and snow was open for her. We might have to sleep in the open during this journey. There won't be any luxurious food like in the Fu. He looked at her and said slowly. He didn't miss any reaction from her. Don't be afraid. I stayed in Mao village for so long. Didn't I go through the same thing? Chu Qingyan replied with a smile. If this was what Big Ice Cube was worried about, then there was no need. She wasn't a pampered young miss. She didn't need to be picky about what she ate. Xiao Su continued to ask, it might take more than 3 to 5 years. The journey will be difficult. It's not as easy as you think. Chu Qingyan looked at him. I'm not afraid of hardship. You don't need to worry about this. These weren't problems. She was a tough woman who could fix water pipes, change light bulbs, carry gas tanks, and fix the ceiling, okay? The person in front of him didn't hesitate when she answered. It made his heart tremble slightly. Xiao Su pursed his thin lips and asked seriously, "What if it's a road of no return? Are you willing to accompany this prince?" Chu Qingyin narrowed her eyes. No wonder Hua Ling and Turin were so worried. It turned out that this wasn't a good task. She shook her head without hesitation. "I'm not afraid." Xiao Su sighed softly. In the end, he compromised and pulled her into his arms. "Remember what you said today. I won't forget." When he convinced her, he was also convincing himself. His reason told him that he couldn't take her with him. The journey was dangerous. He couldn't even protect himself, let alone her. But there was a voice in the depths of her heart that kept saying, "Take her away, take her away." In the end, he still couldn't let go. Perhaps it was because no one could abandon the only light in their life. She had been missing warmth for too long, which was why she cherished it so much. He had never thought that the child he wanted to raise would become his only concern in Jingdo. "You should have lived a carefree life, but in the end I missed this hard-won warmth too much. Because of my own selfishness, I took you away. In front of you, no matter if it's a wolf, a tiger, or a leopard, or a mountain of swords or a sea of fire. This king will protect you safely and happily." Big Ice Cube, so you agreed, right? Happiness came too quickly, and she couldn't react in time. Xiao Su pinched her nose in amusement and teased, "You're so clingy that I can't get rid of you even if I wanted to. What a headache." "Then I'm sorry. I'm afraid you'll continue to have a headache." Chu Qingyin smiled mischievously as the rock in her heart was lifted. She wasn't worried that the big ice cube would go back on his words. As the commander of an army, he couldn't go back on his words. "It's time to eat. Let's go eat." Chu Qingyin held his hand and walked out of the study together. Sometimes, Xiao Su didn't understand how he let her get closer to him step by step and become an indispensable part of him. Perhaps he was too indulgent. Perhaps he had been lonely for too long, and she brought the warmth of a lively atmosphere. So be it. When they reached the hall, the main seat was already occupied. They heard him grumble in dissatisfaction. "Why are you all so slow? We're getting impatient from waiting." Xiao Su calmly sat down and said to retired emperor, "You're an elder. There's no need to wait for us." Chu Qingyin sat down and winked at the Grand Imperial Sire. "The Grand Imperial Sire dotes on us and is worried that we won't have a share after we finish all the food. Don't you agree?" Retired emperor fumed and glared as he said, "That's because we haven't had a full meal for a few days. Yin Lass, don't find an opportunity to ridicule us after catching us once. Be careful that we don't spank you." Chu Qingyin stuck out her tongue. When retired emperor picked up his chopsticks, the two of them picked up their chopsticks. After retired emperor ate a piece of pork rib, he couldn't help but sigh ruefully. "How long has it been since I've had such a meal? Outside, it's all clear soup and tofu, steamed buns and pickled vegetables. We're full of pork ribs now." When Xiao Su heard that, he picked up a piece of braised pork and placed it in Imperial Grandfather's bowl. He said indifferently, "It's you who gave up a good life and insisted on traveling the world." Retired emperor looked at the meat in his bowl and was a little surprised. This grandson of his had never picked up food for him before. Today's action made him feel flattered. He couldn't help but glance at Chu Qingyin. Perhaps this lass's appearance had indeed changed his grandson a lot. It wasn't in vain that he had used his most precious treasure to exchange for an opportunity for divination. When Xiao Su finished speaking, retired emperor rolled his eyes. "What do you know? Roaming the world and riding a horse in Jianghu is truly enjoying life. Moreover, we don't want to stay in the capital and watch your imperial father do those stupid things. Although it's said that it's the father's fault for not teaching well, we've already taught him everything that needs to be taught. We don't know how that melon seed grows in that head. It's like a block of wood, not moving at all." Listening to retired emperor's nagging, Chu Qingyin bit her chopsticks and clicked her tongue. Was it appropriate for them to listen to these secrets? Thus, she asked the person beside her in a low voice, "Let's sit here and listen to these things." Are you sure His Majesty won't? She made a throat-slitting gesture. Xiao Su glanced at her. It'll be fine once you get used to it. Also, eat properly. What kind of scandal is biting your chopsticks? Chu Qingyin silently lowered her head to eat. The big ice cube had turned on his strict father mode again. It was too scary. Retired Emperor, who was singing a one-man show, saw that he couldn't get involved in the interaction between the two. He couldn't help but use his chopsticks to knock on the plate as he said in dissatisfaction, "What? You two lovebirds think we're an eyesore? You don't respect your elders? Be careful that we don't tell your imperial father." Xiao Su leisurely ate his meal and leisurely replied to him, "I wonder who was the one talking bad about him just now." Retired Emperor choked. "Also, don't knock on the plate when eating," Xiao Su added calmly. Retired Emperor was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. Chu Qingyin lowered her head and stifled a laugh. TSK, TSK, TSK. It's fine if the big ice cube doesn't say anything, but once he does, he's going to choke me. In the end, they had a delightful dinner amidst retired Emperor's jesting. Retired Emperor burped and said to his grandson, "Since you can't avoid the matter of Fu Mountain Range, then go ahead and do it. Your imperial father is too stubborn. We don't want to lecture him anymore. You have to take care of yourself." Xiao Su nodded. After speaking, retired Emperor pointed at Chu Qingyin. "Yin lass, we have something to say to you." Chapter 159. Chu Qingyin was a little surprised. The Emperor Emeritus actually wanted to chat with her in private? It was simply too horrifying. She glanced at the large ice cube beside her and saw him nodding at her, indicating that she shouldn't be nervous. Thus, under the Emperor Emeritus's urging, she immediately followed him. When they reached a courtyard, the Emperor Emeritus stopped under a parasol tree and slowly turned around. His expression was different from his previous sloppy one, and it was slightly serious. "Yin lass, do you know why this emperor called you here?" Chu Qingyin was slightly stunned. Then she smiled and said, "Imperial grandfather, how would Qingyin know?" The Emperor Emeritus stroked his beard and looked at her with shrewd eyes. "Don't tell me you don't have anything to ask about this emperor's bestowment of marriage?" Chu Qingyin raised her brows, feeling that the person in front of her didn't treat her like a 10-year-old child. She also withdrew her pure and innocent smile and asked with curved lips, "Then will you tell me?" Smart people didn't need to beat around the bush when conversing with smart people. The Emperor Emeritus laughed heartily. "Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed. Yin lass, this emperor can only say that you can be at ease as your little princess consort. You will know what you need to know sooner or later." Chu Qingyin pursed her lips. Wasn't that the same as not saying anything? Seeing her depressed expression, the Emperor Emeritus was extremely satisfied. The sullenness of these past few days had finally been relieved, but he wasn't a petty person who would only look for opportunities to take revenge. The Emperor Emeritus turned around with his back, facing her with his hands behind his back. His tone was heavy. "Yin lass, this emperor knows that you came from a different world and that you don't belong to the Chu family. This Emperor Emeritus went against heaven's laws and brought you to Tinian continent in hopes that one day you would be able to lend my grandson a hand." Chu Qingyin instantly froze in place. What? Her coming here was all because of the Emperor Emeritus's manipulation? She opened her mouth and had many questions in her heart, but she knew that he still had something to say. She also knew that no matter what she asked, he wouldn't tell her. In the end, she could only squint her eyes and wait for his next words. Going against heaven's will and changing fate wasn't purely for Su-er, but also for Xishuan. But as for the exact reason, I cannot tell you. I only hope that you can treat Su-er well. Ever since he was born, he has never received the happiness he deserved. I watched him grow up, but I was powerless to do anything about it. Such is his fate. He is destined to face more disasters than others. I have already left the imperial family and violated the heavenly Tao, so it is no longer appropriate for me to intervene in these matters. Therefore, the future will depend on the two of you alone. Happiness or sorrow, life or death, it is all up to you. the retired emperor said earnestly. When Chu Qingyin heard these words, she was somewhat astonished and somewhat in disbelief. If he hadn't said that he came from another world, she was afraid that she would have thought that the person in front of her was a swindler. Could it be that modern atheism and scientific notions of ghosts and gods were ineffective here, defying the heavens and changing fate? What was that? What does it mean to be happy or sad, to live or die in a single thought? Was the retired emperor here to be funny? However, she could not bring herself to smile. What does it mean to give him a helping hand? She was just a rice worm who didn't know anything. The abilities that she had were not of much use in ancient times. Moreover, she did not believe that she could help Big Ice Cube with anything. Big Ice Cube was so powerful, and he had elite family generals in his hands that outsiders envied. Why would he need her? As if seeing through her doubts, the retired emperor smiled mysteriously. The current you is so stupid. Of course, you don't have any abilities, but it's hard to guarantee that you won't have any in the future. Although those two words sounded uncomfortable, she knew that this was not the time to fuss over it. Then what should I do, and what shouldn't I do? She raised her head and asked with a serious face. Just follow your heart. The retired emperor turned around and replied word by word. Chu Qingyin was dumbfounded. Wasn't that the same as not saying anything? Just as she was about to ask more questions, the person in front of her changed his serious appearance and rubbed his chin with a gluttonous look. That's right, Yin lass, the pastry you made this morning was really good. Are there any others? This solitude wants to try them. Chu Qingyin withered in the wind. You can't play like this. But she knew that the other party had already said what he wanted to say. If she continued to ask, it would be meaningless if he didn't say anything. Although today's conversation threw a heavy bomb into her life, at least she already knew the reason why she suddenly transmigrated when she woke up from her sleep in the dressing room. Facing this main culprit, she couldn't get angry. At least he had already compensated her with precious family affection. But it was really a little mysterious. Forget it. Since she was already here, she should just go and make some pastries for this old urchin who suddenly popped out. As for the rest, she would leave it to the heavens to arrange. Seeing that she obediently went to make pastries for him, the retired emperor stroked his beard in satisfaction. Adapting to the situation, crafty and wise. The person he chose would not be bad. It's just that he couldn't predict what would happen next. But he would wait and see. Returning to the courtyard, she saw De Bing sitting on the main seat. The faint yellow light from the fire gently draped over his body, reducing his coldness by a bit. The silver mask also lost a bit of its mystery. Dressed in a black robe, he had the leisure of a family member. Chu Qingyin was a little dazed. Most of the women in the capital were blind. What right did they have to say that her family's De Bing was horrifyingly ugly? Just this charm alone was enough to throw off those self-proclaimed elegant young masters by several streets. While she was angrily thinking, she couldn't help but walk in. Imperial grandfather finished talking to you? He put down the book in his hand and looked at her. And he said some things, but I didn't really understand. Indeed, some of the retired emperor's words sounded very mysterious, making it hard for her to accept. Or it could be said that she still didn't understand. Xiao Su laughed in spite of himself. No need to pay attention to it. He's probably bored to death and wanted to tease you. If only it was like this, then it would be good. But she faintly felt that things weren't that simple. At least, the retired emperor wouldn't summon her from the modern era for no reason. However, this old urchin's way of doing things was strange and unpredictable. Could it be that he was really bored and casually brought her over? If that was the case, then wouldn't she be too sullen? Xiao Su originally didn't care about the matter of Imperial grandfather looking for her, but seeing that her expression wasn't right, he couldn't help but slightly frown. What did Imperial grandfather say to you? She regained her senses and wanted to talk to him, but if she said something like transmigrating, De Bing would probably think that she was hot-headed and talking nonsense. So she blinked and said in a strange manner, Imperial grandfather said that I came for you. Chapter 160. When Xiao Su heard this, he laughed and shook his head. Imperial grandfather likes to make things up. If you believe it, you'll be stupid. Chu Qingyan nodded in agreement. Imperial grandfather did seem like a swindler, but her half-truth was still a bit believable. But the Big Ice Cube clearly did not believe it. So she probed, Big Ice Cube, do you believe in reincarnating souls, traveling through time and space and changing fate? Xiao Su raised his brows. Are you messing around again? Chu Qingyan shrugged, feeling a bit defeated. This kind of thing did sound a bit shocking. Seeing her little face twisted, Xiao Su thought for a moment before saying, maybe there are things in this world that sound unimaginable. This prince is not sure, but I won't deny it. Hearing this, Chu Qingyan was a bit moved. Actually, the Big Ice Cube said this to prevent her from being disappointed. AI, why did it feel like the Big Ice Cube was becoming more and more human? It felt really inconceivable, but it also made her endlessly happy. Could it be that the battle to melt the Big Ice Cube from before was having an effect now? The night was dark. The stars were bright and numerous, as if they were covered in sparkling gems. Chu Qingyan looked through the window, leisurely enjoying the tranquility of this moment. She finally let go of the worries she had for the Big Ice Cube these days. Her entire person was calm and relaxed. Xiao Su looked at her increasingly beautiful side profile and was very gratified. The little fellow was already slowly growing up. When he heard everyone's evaluation of her these days, he had a kind of illusion of glory. This was something he had never experienced even after winning a battle. It was a bit novel, but also a bit joyful. At this time, the little fellow, who had only been quiet for a moment, turned her head and asked with a smile, when are we leaving to mine? Mine? Only she could think of that. Xiao Su muttered, we'll leave the day after tomorrow. Then there was still one day left. Chu Qingyan rubbed her head. She had to say goodbye to her parents and make arrangements for their following life. Time was a bit tight. Seeing the faint worry on her face, Xiao Su put down the book in his hand and beckoned to her. Come here. Chu Qingyan, who was deep in thought, instinctively approached him. What's wrong? Xiao Su looked at her seriously. If you regret it, it's not too late. Chu Qingyan was a little unconvinced. Big Ice Cube, I'm not the kind of person who goes back on her words and speaks without thinking, okay? I'm not regretting it. I just can't bear to part with my parents. Xiao Su didn't know why, but he felt relieved. He raised his hand and placed it on top of her head. His tone was indifferent as he said, have White Tiger arrange a suitable place to clean this prince's courtyard. Have him arrange for a few servants, then bring your parents in. The moment he finished speaking, he saw her widen her eyes and look at him in disbelief. He asked in confusion, what's wrong? Chu Qingyan shook her head. She blinked and looked him up and down before murmuring, Big Ice Cube, I find that you're getting more and more tactful. I thought that you wouldn't care about these miscellaneous matters. Is this prince that unbearable? Xiao Su pressed her head a little harder until she grimaced. Then he released her in satisfaction and resumed his noble and unapproachable attitude. Besides, this prince has dealt with quite a lot of the trouble you've caused. How can matters related to you be considered miscellaneous matters? Chu Qingyan was instantly overwhelmed by the favor. She rubbed her head and said hesitantly, then is it okay to bring father and mother out to live, rather than worrying about whether they've been bullied? Why not bring them under your wings and protect them well? Wouldn't that be more worry-free? Xiao Su said with raised brows. She had to admit that what the Big Ice Cube said was very reasonable, but she was a bit uncertain. Her wings were not fully grown yet. Could she really protect her father and mother? She always wanted to bring her father and mother out of the Chu family, but the reason she did not make a move was because she knew that she was not strong enough and did not want her father and mother to suffer outside. The Chu family was worried about the Big Ice Cube's face, so they did not dare move against her father and mother on the surface. But it was hard to guarantee that once they left the capital for the Fuli mountain range, the Chu family would not deliberately make things difficult for her father and mother. This was what she was worried about. Perhaps you don't have enough strength to protect the people you want to protect. Then before that, this king can temporarily borrow your strength. These calm words did not contain any pride or glory. It was as if he was simply stating a fact, but it filled her heart with gratitude. She already did not know what words to use to express the excitement and gratitude in her heart. The matter of your father and mother, I'll leave it to Hualing to take care of. Although he was leaving the capital, he had more than enough strength to protect these people. Chu Qingyin nodded again. Perhaps it would be a long time before she would know that everything the big ice cube did today was to set up a backup plan. He had expected the result, so he protected them ahead of time. But at that time, she did not know and enjoyed everything with a clear conscience. If she did not go with him, then she would have been one of those backup plans. But he never thought that she would be so stubborn to stay by his side. And she never thought that because she followed him without any hesitation, it would help the two of them resolve their dispute. Buddha said that for all things, if there was a cause, then there was an effect. If there was an effect, then there was a cause. It was not decided by fate, it was only decided by a person. We're leaving the day after tomorrow. Is there anyone the big ice cube wants to say goodbye to? She was going to explain the situation to her father and mother tomorrow, so they would not worry. She was also going to tell them about moving. At the same time, she remembered that although the big ice cube did not interact with anyone in the capital and no one came to visit, there might be someone he wanted to say goodbye to. She couldn't help asking this out of curiosity. Say goodbye? A trace of confusion flashed through Xiao Su's eyes. Then, under the little fellow's unblinking gaze, he regained his train of thought. Yes, I'll go to the palace to see Imperial Mother tomorrow. Empress Liang? Chu Qingyin instantly dispelled the image in her mind of the thread in the hand of a kind mother, the clothes on a wanderer, the seams closed before leaving, the fear of returning late. She would never believe that Empress Liang would treat the big ice cube like this. I'll go with you. She leaned on the table and said with a smile. The sadness in his heart was dispelled by the words of the person in front of him. Xiao Su looked at her with a gentleness that he did not notice. He said in a teasing tone, "Don't you think the palace is a scourge? Why do you suddenly have the courage to go into the deep pool?" Was she as bad as the big ice cube said? She said righteously, "How can you catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? Anyway, I'll go with you." In the book of parenting, children were fickle. He deeply understood this point at this moment. Chu Qingyin saw that he did not respond, so she agreed. Every time the big ice cube entered the palace, something bad would happen. She was no longer willing to let him bear it alone. He protected her family's safety, so she did not want to see him sad. If he wanted her to stand up and accompany him, she would never back down. Chapter 161. The next morning, Chu Qingyin appeared in front of Xiao Su's door. Because he was going on a long journey, the Sichuan emperor had excused him from attending morning court. Xiao Su walked out of the room and saw the impatient little fellow. Last night, he promised to accompany her to buy things after leaving the palace. No wonder she was so impatient today. Ji Yunshu shook her head and said helplessly, "Let's go." Before she stepped out of the courtyard, Chu Qingyin almost missed her step. Go early and come back early. Tonight, we want to eat soup dumplings, pan-fried dumplings, and bird's nest soup. Chu Qingyin looked back helplessly at the old urchin, who was waving his hands at her with all his might. She replied weakly, "Got it." Then she looked up and complained softly to the person beside her. Imperial grandfather is a complete foodie. Xiao Su laughed in spite of himself. In the past, when Imperial grandfather was in charge of the Sichuan, he often forgot to eat and sleep. After passing the throne to Imperial father, he wandered the world. Delicious food also became a part of his life. Chu Qingyin nodded in understanding. That's why I'm saying that he doesn't want to miss out on things that he didn't seriously enjoy before. You can say that. She nodded and then smiled. Then tonight, I'll make a few more pastries that Imperial grandfather hasn't eaten before. Xiao Su looked down at her. Aren't you afraid that Imperial grandfather will blame you for this? She rubbed her head and smiled. If he wants to, then so be it. In any case, he's spending your money. Moreover, he's your grandfather. It's only right to be filial to him. I have no power and no talent, so I can only make small things to win his favor. Xiao Su's brows twitched slightly. He helped her into the carriage. "You're already very good like this." In his eyes, her sincerity for him was already more important than those worldly possessions. The carriage soon arrived at the entrance of the palace. The two got off the carriage and smoothly arrived at Chaoyang Palace. Luo Yun was waiting at the entrance of the hall, as if she was not surprised to see His Highness. However, when her eyes fell on Chu Qingyan, her eyes flashed slightly, as if she did not expect to see her. "Your Highness has suffered a lot during this period of time," Luo Yun said somewhat worriedly. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Luo. I wonder if Imperial Mother has gotten up? I'll have to trouble Aunt Luo to inform them." Xiao Su stood outside the hall, with Chu Qingyan as he spoke to Luo Yun. Chu Qingyan shook her head in her heart. In front of outsiders, the big ice cube always had a kind of aura that kept people away. If it was like this, it was no wonder that the prince's residence was always cold and cheerless. No one came to visit. Those who wanted to get close were probably afraid of being frozen to death by the big ice cube's cold air. At this time, Luo Yun heard and showed a troubled expression. "Your Highness, Her Highness the Empress has already ordered that the doors will be closed for the next few days. Please go back." Xiao Su's eyes flickered slightly, as if there was a flash of darkness in them. However, they quickly regained their clarity. Just as he was about to reply, the person beside him had already stepped forward and spoke to Luo Yun in a clear voice. "Aunt Luo, His Highness will set out tomorrow. Today, I specially came to bid farewell to Her Highness the Empress. If Her Highness the Empress knows that His Highness is about to go on a long journey, she shouldn't refuse us at the door. I'll have to trouble Aunt Luo to go in and report." Chu Qingyan's face was full of smiles, and her words were reasonable. Even though Luo Yun had been in the palace for so long, she couldn't find a single mistake to refute. She looked at His Highness and saw that he was also waiting for her reply. She couldn't help but grit her teeth and say, "Your Highness, please wait a moment. This servant will go in and report." Seeing Luo Yun turn and enter the hall, the smile on Chu Qingyan's face slowly disappeared. "Empress Liang, you really have the heart to refuse your own son at the door? Tomorrow, he's going on a long journey. Maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's not even in the foreseeable future. You really have the heart to refuse even one meeting?" She turned her head to look at the tall figure under the sunlight. "Big ice cube, your heart, has it become ice cold again?" She secretly clenched her fists that were hidden in her sleeves. She did not open her mouth to disturb the big ice cube. At this moment, her gaze was fixed on the tightly shut palace door. She was both anticipating and worried that it would open again. Waiting was always the longest. Only a quarter of an hour had passed, but it made people feel like a season had passed. The doors creaked open, and Luo Yun's figure appeared. Out of the corner of her eyes, she saw the big ice cube's eyebrows move slightly. Chu Qingyan sighed softly. Although the big ice cube was always cold and cheerless, as if he didn't feel anything around him, she knew that he cared. Blood was thicker than water. No one would be indifferent to their own family. Chu Qingyan stared at Luo Yun, but when she saw the expression on her face, she suddenly had a bad feeling. As expected, "Your Highness, the Empress is not feeling well. It's not convenient for her to see you." Luo Yun looked at him with an awkward expression. No one saw Xiao Su's eyes suddenly darken. He nodded slightly. "I'll have to trouble Aunt Luo. It's easy to get tired in the autumn. Please go to the Imperial Hospital to find a doctor to treat Imperial Mother so that she can be cured as soon as possible." Luo Yun nodded and then continued. "Your Highness, Master has a few words for this servant to pass on to you. There's no harm in saying it." Xiao Su looked up at the person on the steps and responded. "The Empress said that this path was chosen by you, and this consort has no right to interfere. Nearly 20 years of effort have been spent on you, but it's already been wasted. You aren't willing to bear the responsibility of the Liang family. You aren't willing to fulfill Imperial Mother's wishes. You haven't accepted the so-called wishful thinking of letting you grow stronger. Then, regardless of whether you live or die, Whether you are rich or poor, I hope that you will take care of yourself. This consort will no longer interfere, and the Liang family will no longer help you." Luo Yun finished speaking in one breath, but her eyes didn't dare to look down the steps at His Highness, who was emitting an icy aura. Chu Qingyin listened to these words angrily. What did she mean by this path was chosen by herself? Wasn't it difficult to follow imperial orders? What did she mean by all her effort being wasted? May I ask if you cared about your son before? Do you know what he likes and hates the most? What did she mean by wishful thinking of letting him grow and not accepting it? Do you know what he needs the most? He doesn't need anything. He's already strong enough. He only needs the warmth of his loved ones. If you aren't even willing to give him such a humble wish, do you still deserve to be called a mother? When he was helpless, lonely, and wandering, you cut off his path of retreat because of everything that happened before. Empress, are you really worthy of the word mother? Chu Qingyin clenched her fists, her veins popping. She wasn't willing to remain silent. Just as she was about to open her mouth to berate, her wrist was grabbed by a strong force. She turned her head to look at the person beside her in surprise. He replied without any emotion, "Please tell my Imperial Mother. I will remember Imperial Mother's teachings. Please take care of Imperial Mother's body while I am not here. I will withdraw." Chu Qingyin bit her lip and swallowed the words that were about to burst out, as well as the raging flames of anger. She forced herself to lower her head and no longer look at those three golden words. Chaoyang Palace? Why couldn't she feel the warmth of the sun and wind? She only felt an eerie chill. Big Ice Cube, how can you not make my heart ache? Chapter 162. Holding her wrist, he turned around and led her away step by step. "Your Highness, please take care." Luo Yun's voice was choked with sobs as she knelt down behind him. Chu Qingyin did not turn around. She was afraid that if she did, she would not be able to resist the urge to rush up and push open the door. She would fiercely ask the person inside if she was still her mother. Her wrist slipped out of his slender fingers and turned to hold his hand. She knew that words at this time would have no effect on the big ice cube. She chose to use silent companionship to dispel the haze in his heart. 9 years ago, this king left the palace to gain experience. The doors of Chaoyang Palace were also tightly closed. 7 years ago, I left the palace to fight. 5 years ago, 3 years ago, Imperial Mother did not want to see me. In her eyes, only by gaining Imperial Father's favor and making contributions to the court can one stand firm. However, this king was not willing. The capital is too suffocating. Step by step, he slowly walked, but his heart was covered with dark clouds, making it hard for him to breathe. He didn't know if it was because the hand in his palm was too warm or because the person accompanying him made him feel at ease. But he suddenly had the urge to talk. Chu Qingyin did not think that he would suddenly open his mouth. But when she heard him slowly talk about his matters, his tone as if it was not important, her eyes slowly became warm and wet. "I don't think there's anything wrong with gaining experience in fighting. Read 10,000 books and travel 10,000 li. If you don't go out and see things when you encounter something in the future, you will only use military force on paper. Moreover, a man who makes contributions is always more attractive than those who scrupulously abide by their duties, right?" She tried to use a playful tone to say these words, trying to cheer him up. Xiao Su faintly smiled when he heard this, but the darkness in his eyes did not dissipate for a long time. Chu Qingyin saw this and her heart hurt a little, but she didn't know how to comfort him. After all, the knot in his heart for nearly 20 years was not something that could be untied in a day. It was like a disease, but she was not afraid to spend time to help him untie it and dispel the coldness in his heart, because what she did not lack the most right now was time. "Big Ice Cube, I don't plan on buying anything. When the time comes, I'll list everything on a piece of paper and have Steward buy it for me." She felt that the big ice cube right now was not suitable for the bustling streets. The loneliness in his heart and the bustling streets would create a sharp contrast. Xiao Su did not ask why she suddenly changed her mind. He just nodded and brought her into the carriage. Big ice cube. To mine, where do we go? Sitting in the carriage, Chu Qingyin, trying her best to find a topic to distract him. Xiao Su only smiled at her insistence on calling this trip a mining trip. Suddenly, he was in the mood to explain these things to her, as a way to prepare her mentally. Our current location is in the southeast of Xixian, and the Fuli Mountains are in the northwest. Therefore, we have to pass through the entire Xixian country to reach it. We have to pass through the Jiangxia region, the Jiangnan River, the Mali River, the low-lying basin, the Fujing Mountains, the Hutang Desert, and finally pass through the Chungling Forest to reach the Fuli Mountains. Cross Sichuan. Water, basin, mountain, desert, and forest. Chu Qingyin's face was full of black lines. It seemed that this trip was really long, so she began to carefully think about what to bring. Where there is water, we should bring enough rain gear because it is easy to encounter rainy days. In the desert, we should pay attention to the situation where there is no water. We must bring a water bottle. In the forest, there are many mosquitoes, snakes, and ants. Mosquito nets and herbs are indispensable. Xiao Su leaned on the soft couch and saw the person beside him counting with her fingers. He could not help but laugh and shake his head. But the little fellow was still beyond his expectations. She was not frightened by the facts he said. Instead, she began to think about what to prepare next. Along the way, listening to the little fellow's nagging, Xiao Su suddenly felt that when he was alone, he did not feel lonely. But now when two people were together, he felt that it was good to be lively. At this time, the little fellow raised her head and asked with some confusion, "If we don't see any villages or shops on the road, should we prepare some dry food?" Xiao Su heard and nodded. "Usually, we prepare some dry steamed buns, sesame seed cakes, and the like." Chu Qingyin could not help but shake her head. Dry steamed buns, sesame seed cakes, and the like were vegetarian. She had to think about what could be light enough to carry and eat to fill the stomach. Chu Qingyin thought, and had already returned to the King of England's residence. As soon as she entered the residence, she saw her father squatting on the ground and counting ants. "Father, why are you here?" She originally thought that she would have to go to the Chu residence, but she did not expect that her father had already appeared in the King of England's residence. Chu Qingyin's heart surged with joy. Hearing the sound, Father Chu jumped up and waved his hand at the two people, then quickly went over. Chu Qingyin originally thought that her father was looking for her, but unexpectedly, her father quickly passed by her and walked in front of the big ice block. He stroked his beard and said, "Son-in-law, I heard that you are going on a long journey. The journey is long. You have to pay attention to your own safety." Chu Qingyin suddenly felt a gust of cold wind pass by her side. "Don't be like this, okay?" "Father, can you take a good look at who is your real daughter?" Father Chu did not notice his daughter's hurt expression at all and continued to ask her all sorts of questions in high spirits. For example, remember to bring a quilt. Remember to bring good food when it is cold at night. Remember to bring money when you are hungry on the road. Remember to bring money to buy things. In any case, it was all very miscellaneous things. But she did not know why, but she felt very warm as she listened to him. Xiao Su, who was supposed to be impatient, didn't know when, but he started to listen to Father Chu's long-winded and nonsensical words. He didn't feel annoyed at all. Perhaps he had never experienced familial affection, but at this moment, it was slowly flowing by his side. "Father, you not only have the big ice block, you also have a daughter, okay? Don't forget your daughter when you have a son-in-law, okay?" Chu Qingyin pretended to be jealous as she held her father's hand and muttered unhappily. When Father Chu heard this, he glared at her as if he did not have the leisure to pay attention to her. "Kai, you are so stupid. You are together with a big ice block. If he takes good care of himself, isn't that the same as taking good care of you? All right, you're already an adult. What are you getting jealous for?" Chu Qingyin felt that her father's fallacious reasoning was somewhat reasonable, but it could not hide the fact that he was very biased. However, she could clearly feel that the coldness from the depths of the palace was slowly dissipating from the big ice block. This was good too. "Your Highness, Kai, Yuan Lang, you are back." Mother Chu came out of the courtyard and greeted the three with a smile when she saw them. The wind after autumn was a little cold, but the air that lingered between the four of them seemed to carry the warmth of a spring breeze. She did not know if there would be a chance in the future, but she would remember this moment. Xiao Su frowned, his heart filled with endless disappointment. Chapter 163. Your Highness, this concubine went to the temple to ask for these two amulets for you. They've already been consecrated and will protect you on your journey. After eating together, Chu Mu's mother took out two red amulets and said to Xiao Su with some hesitation. After all, she had asked for them on her own initiative. Xiao Su was the prince of a country, and his status wasn't ordinary. She was worried that he wouldn't accept them. Thank you, Madam Chu. Xiao Su took them without hesitation and put them in his sleeve. Even Chu Qingyan, who understood him well, couldn't help but be stunned by his smooth movements. The Emperor Emeritus bit his chopsticks and looked at this scene in disbelief. Why did his grandson, who had never accepted benefits from others, suddenly have such a change in temperament? Chu Mu's mother also didn't expect this, but when she saw that one of the amulets in her hand was gone, she couldn't help but feel relieved. His Royal Highness wasn't as unreasonable as the rumors said. Chu Qingyan saw that her mother was stunned in place and couldn't help but reach out to take the other amulet from her. She smiled and said, "Mother, you're so nice. I was just lacking one. In the future, when I see an amulet on the road, I'll think of father and mother. I also have a parting gift for you. I also have one." Chu Mu's father impatiently took out two small knives that had been sharpened and handed them to the two of them as if he was asking for praise. "Look, this is a dagger. I learned it from Blockhead and put a lot of effort into it. You can put it on your body to protect yourself." Chu Qingyan clicked her tongue. The blades looked so sharp, she didn't know how father hid them on his body. She was about to reach out to take them, but a pair of hands beat her to it. She looked suspiciously at Big Ice Cube putting the daggers in his sleeve. Could it be that he wanted to help her keep them? Xiao Su thought to himself. The blades were so sharp, it was better to let Mu Ling make two scabbards that fit. Otherwise, with the little fellow's careless temperament, it might hurt him. The Emperor Emeritus almost bit his chopsticks in half. When did his grandson accept gifts so readily? He was practically blinded. But in his heart, he felt that this was a good thing. At the very least, those who were previously unreachable and floating in the air had now fallen into the mortal world. They were slowly experiencing the mortal world and were no longer so distant. However, the Emperor Emeritus still felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. How could these two outsiders be more diligent than him, their biological grandfather? However, to be honest, he really didn't prepare anything good, so he could only say dryly, "Well, Su Yin when you set off the day after tomorrow, remember to call me." "What for?" Xiao Su raised his eyebrows and asked. "I'm going the same way as you. Let's go together." The retired emperor coughed lightly. He couldn't just say that he was hitching a ride. Xiao Su looked at him with understanding, but he didn't say anything, which meant that he agreed. Chu Qingyan scratched her head in confusion. Didn't retired emperor say that he was going to visit his friends in the West? Why is it on the way again? She saw the Emperor Emeritus put down his bowl and chopsticks. Before he left, he instructed, "Yin prepare more pastries in the next 2 days and bring them along." Chu Qingyan blushed with shame. It turned out that the Emperor Emeritus wasn't going the same way, but had taken a fancy to the pastries she made. After the meal, Chu Qingyan took her parents downstairs, while Xiao Su slowly walked to the door of the study. At this time, there was already someone waiting there. Ethereal, who was dressed in white, was dressed casually. "What's the matter?" Xiao Su's mood was relaxed at this time, and his voice also carried a trace of elegance. Ethereal was slightly surprised. Every time he left the capital, His Highness's mood was always very low. Why was it different this time? However, this kind of change was always good. He bowed slightly and said, "Lord, this subordinate has already found out that my junior sister has been moving around the Jiangzhou region in recent years. Although her whereabouts aren't very clear, at least we can lock onto a small area. We don't have to search blindly like in the past. Xiao Su nodded. You can leave this matter to Water Spirit. When we find her, we can have her bring her to the capital to treat First Master Chu's illness. Ethereal shook his head, his face carrying a trace of reluctance. Lord, I'm afraid this won't work. Why? Xiao Su couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. This subordinate of his had been by his side for many years, and his behavior had always been careless. He had never shown a difficult expression on a matter, so he couldn't help but be curious. He wasn't a cold-hearted master. Although he didn't ask about his subordinate's private affairs, it didn't mean that he didn't care. Seeing that his lord had already asked, Ethereal smiled embarrassedly. This subordinate and my junior sister have some misunderstandings. This misunderstanding hasn't been resolved for many years. In addition, because of this subordinate, she has a deep misunderstanding of the Sichuan royal family. If she knew that you sent someone to treat her illness, she would definitely close the door and refuse to accept. Xiao Su understood something. It seemed that he and that junior sister had a deep relationship. This time we'll pass by the Jiangxia region on our mining trip, so this subordinate wants to take this opportunity to visit her in person. I hope that she will agree to treat me for my sake. If she can resolve the misunderstanding from back then, that would be even better. Ethereal slowly expressed his thoughts. In fact, he wasn't confident in his heart. His junior sister had been drifting around the world for many years to avoid him. This time, if there was an opportunity, he would personally pay her a visit. Xiao Su remembered that 10 years ago, he was the one who sent Ethereal to study medicine under Divine Dr. Luo. It wasn't until 6 years ago that Ethereal returned to his side after completing his studies. He wasn't very clear about what happened in those 4 years. Ethereal also kept his mouth shut. He felt that in those few years, Ethereal had matured from being young and inexperienced to being able to take charge of things on his own. It was just that he was more indifferent to everything around him than before. All right, he had always trusted his subordinates. Without asking for the reason, he agreed. Ethereal was a little touched. Actually, his master could directly send someone to forcefully invite him back to the capital. However, his master didn't do so. Instead, he chose the worst method for his sake. At this moment, Ethereal saw the young princess consort walking over from the corner. He bowed slightly towards her before bidding farewell to his master. This subordinate will go and prepare the medicine for the trip. Xiao Su nodded. At the same time, Chu Qingyin's voice sounded. Big Ice Cube, I've been looking for you for a long time. So you're here. Xiao Su turned around and looked at the person who was like a butterfly jumping in the sunlight. He asked softly, What's the matter? I want to send father and mother back to the Chu residence. Although Steward Bai has already started to select the courtyard and arrange for manpower, I'm worried that if we're not there, something will happen to the Chu residence. So I want to personally make a trip. Chu Qingyin scratched her head in annoyance. As the saying goes, the mountain is high and the emperor is far away. If they leave, it will take a long time before they can return. So she must solve this hidden danger of the Chu family. Ben Wang will accompany you. Xiao Su casually said. What? Chu Qingyin felt that she heard wrongly. Why are you still standing there in a daze? Let's go. Xiao Su had already started walking towards the courtyard. Chu Qingyin raised her head to look at the sky. The sun didn't rise from the west today. Hey, Big Ice Cube, slow down. Wait for me. Chapter 164. Although she didn't understand why Big Ice Block would suddenly want to go to the Chu Manor with them, Chu Qingyin didn't ask too much about it. Otherwise, Big Ice Block finally wanted to relax. If he went back on his word after being asked, wouldn't that be a loss? Once Big Ice Block left, Gu Rong and Gu Yi also followed. She remembered that when she first saw Big Ice Block in the Chu Manor, he was accompanied by these two twins. At that time, she couldn't tell which one was which, but now she could. The smiling face was Hu Rong, while the gloomy face was Gu Yi. Although the two of them weren't very satisfied with her at that time because of Big Ice Block's intentional or unintentional protection of her and Hua Ling and the other's special treatment of her, Gu Rong and Gu Yi didn't reject her as obviously as before. However, they also didn't get close to her. At most, they would greet her when they met and didn't say anything else. After all, the two of them had been beaten because of her, so it was normal for them to dislike her. She didn't need to try to change other people's opinion of her. After all, some things were innate. If others didn't like her, she couldn't do anything about it. Because they were about to leave, and their parents wouldn't come out to send them off tomorrow, it would be a long time before they could see each other again. So Chu Qingyan and her parents rode in the same carriage, while Xiao Su rode in his own carriage. The Chu manor and the King of England's manor were separated by some distance. By the time they arrived, an hour had already passed. Father Chu and Mother Chu got out of the carriage first, and Chu Qingyan landed after them. She looked up at the Chu manor's gate. Because she was granted a marriage, the Sichuan emperor rewarded the Chu family with a lot of money. The Chu family pocketed all the money and couldn't wait to renovate the Chu manor. By the time they came back, the money had already been spent. So this Chu manor could be said to have a golden exterior and a rotten interior. On the surface, it looked magnificent, but the inside had already been hollowed out. The two manservants who were originally standing by the door turned a blind eye to the person who alighted from the carriage. Suddenly, they saw Chu Qingyan alighting from the carriage. Their arrogant faces disappeared, and they immediately bowed politely. Ninth young lady Chu has returned to the Fu. Your presence brings light to our humble dwelling. Chu Qingyan sighed. What a classic example of a monk. At this moment, Xiao Su also got down from the carriage and slowly walked over. The manservant had never seen him before, but when he saw him get down from the carriage of the King of England's mansion with a mask on his face, a chill ran down his spine, and he knelt down with a plop. His Royal Highness, Chu Qingyan, shrugged her shoulders at Xiao Su. It seemed that his reputation was still the best. Xiao Su disapprovingly took the lead and stepped into the mansion. Chu Qingyan followed closely behind with her parents. When old Master Chu and the others learned that His Royal Highness had arrived, they immediately gathered everyone to wait in the front courtyard. When Chu Qingyan stepped into the courtyard, she was shocked by the people in the courtyard. Apart from old Master Chu's birthday, she had never seen such a neat family again. His Royal Highness has graced us with his presence. Please take a seat. Old Master Chu's wrinkled face was about to burst into a smile. The others immediately stepped forward to chime in. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. In the modern world, everything depended on one's appearance. Now that they were in ancient times, everything depended on one's power. If it were her parents who came back, these people's attitudes would probably be disdainful. Xiao Su did not decline and sat down in the main seat. Chu Qingyan walked to his side and stood upright. She wanted to see what the big ice cube's purpose was. Otherwise, with his personality that did not like to socialize, he would not have such a reaction. The seats were arranged according to the order of seniority. Old Master Chu and Old Madam Chu, her parents, second Old Master Chu and his wife, third Old Master Chu and his wife, fourth Old Master Chu and his wife, and on the other side were Chu Dekang and a few other youths. May I know why His Royal Highness has suddenly graced us with his presence? Madam Xing was a shrewd person, and she was also good at social interactions. After the servant girls served tea, she covered her mouth with a handkerchief and giggled. As soon as Madam Xing finished speaking, everyone's gazes seemed to focus on the person in the main seat. The King of England's reputation for ruthlessness was well known, and no one dared to stare at him so openly. Moreover, the masked King of England inexplicably made people feel that he was somewhat ferocious. The youths did not even dare to raise their heads. Chu Qingyan saw everyone's reaction and only felt that it was a little ridiculous. She did not need to explain her family's big ice cube's good points to unimportant people. Qingyan, about the matter of your parents' migration, you say it. Xiao Su only said this one sentence and leaned back in his chair, as if he was handing over everything to her. When everyone heard this, they were somewhat puzzled and could only turn their gazes to Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan was stunned, but she quickly took over the topic. Granduncle, aunts, uncles, aunts, I am indebted to everyone for taking care of my parents over the past few days. Now that Qingyan has found a place for my parents to settle down, there is no need to disturb the residents in the future. When old Madame Chu heard this, she was unhappy. With the eldest son and eldest daughter-in-law of the Chu family in the residence, even if Xiao Su was not favored now, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. They could still get some benefits. If the two of them moved away now, wouldn't they lose 2 money trees for nothing? Ever since Xiao Su and the Chu family became in-laws, those high-ranking officials and nobles had sent many gifts to the Chu family. In fact, it was to establish a good relationship with them, and their Chu family was also prestigious outside. After all, they had a granddaughter and a niece who was a princess consort of the royal family. Even if they committed a crime, outsiders would still give them some face. Therefore, the Chu family took advantage of this relationship. Although they did not deprive Father and Mother Chu of food and clothing, it was not considered good. Thus, old Madame Chu pretended to be surprised and said, "Are you dissatisfied with the Chu family's lack of food and clothing? So you want to set up another residence?" When old Madame Chu said this, everyone looked over with disapproving gazes. And Madame Xing also asked Father and Mother Chu hypocritically, "Are our Chu family not treating eldest brother and sister-in-law well? If there is anything that is not considerate, I hope that eldest brother and sister-in-law can point it out. We will definitely correct it." These words were said with extreme grievance, as if it was her parents who were picky and made them compromise. And Madame Wang also nodded and said, "Eldest brother and sister-in-law, if you have something to say, just say it. We are all one family. There is no need to be so polite." Those who spoke were all women, and those men did not interrupt and just watched from the sidelines. In any case, there was nothing that could not be done with these women speaking. Chu Qingyin saw through their tricks at a glance. She couldn't help but snort coldly. These people's skin was thicker than the city walls. They were wearing the most popular clothes on the market, while her parents' clothes were not new. They really had the nerve to say that. Say what you want to say. This prince is here. Suddenly, such a sentence came from the side. Chu Qingyin suddenly realized that the big ice cube was here to support her. Fine. Who's afraid of a fox exploiting the tiger's might? Chapter 165. Ant, as well as the other ants, Qingyin doesn't have any other intentions. I just feel that my parents like peace and quiet, and the Chu family has too many mouths, so it's inevitable that they'll feel uncomfortable. That's why I had the idea of moving out. Chu Qingyin said bluntly. She had already seen their attitude towards her parents just now. Other than the food and accommodation, it was really annoying in other aspects. Too many mouths? Qingyin, what do you mean by that? Are you implying that we're harsh on your parents? Madame Wang couldn't hold back and said in a rather unhappy tone. Qingyin didn't mean that. Chu Qingyin was too lazy to argue with her. Chu Qingyin stood naturally and gracefully in the hall, elegant and beautiful, like a flower that was about to bloom. The several young ladies present suddenly discovered that in just a few months, Chu Qingyin had become more and more like water spirit, and she had also grown taller. Compared to when she first came to the capital, she was simply too different. The few young ladies began to feel jealous in their hearts, but on second thought, Xiao Su was just a wasted prince who was no longer useful, so their hearts immediately calmed down. In fact, people's jealousy was like this. When envious of someone, they would speculate on the dark side of selfishness, and then inexplicably make a lot of bad conjectures, and then their heart would be satisfied. Look, you're just SOSO. Confucius said, the old one is the old one, the old one is the old one, the young one is the young one. Ninth sister, you have to treat your elders like a junior, otherwise you will be criticized. The bookworm Chu Qingyin stood up and lectured her with the attitude of an elder brother. Confucius also said, don't do to others what you don't want done to you. You have fish and meat, but my parents are like tofu and soup. I don't know where your so-called kindness to my parents comes from. Chu Qingyin didn't care about falling out with them. In any case, the big ice cube had spoken, so she didn't mind falling out with them. Confucius said, Chu Qingyin continued to talk about Kong Ziyun, but Chu Qingyin had already impatiently interrupted him. Don't always talk about Confucius. He doesn't have so much time to care so much about your trivial matters. You'd better read your books honestly. Don't always shake your head. Otherwise, you'll really become a pedantic bookworm. Chu Qingyan hated the most that he always looked like a saint, opening and closing his mouth saying that Confucius was righteous and Ming was righteous and self-righteous. He had always been the pride of the family, but he was taught a lesson by his sister who was several years younger than him. Chu Qingyan was so angry that his face turned red. However, he, who boasted of his good manners, couldn't curse like a woman in the street. He could only say angrily, Confucius said that only women and villains are difficult to raise. Same here. Don't forget, the one who gave birth to you and raised you is also a woman. Chu Qingyan retorted effortlessly. Chu Qingyan was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. He flung his sleeves and sat down. Seeing her son being scolded so harshly, Madame Wang saw out of the corner of her eye that Madame Xing was secretly laughing. She felt uncomfortable and stood up, saying to Xiao Su with an aggrieved expression, His Royal Highness, look at Qingyan's young age, but her temper is quite bad. Today, she dared to disobey her elders and elder brother in front of you. If this continues, who knows what will happen in the future? She was implying that if she dared to act so recklessly today, she would dare to expose the roof tomorrow and scold her. Madame Xing thought that her sowing discord would work, but she was wrong. If it weren't for Chu Qingyan's face, Xiao Su wouldn't even take a step into the Chu estate. Now, it was even more impossible for Xiao Su to scold Chu Qingyan. Does Madame Xing have a problem with this prince's pampering? Xiao Su said indifferently, not even giving her a glance. Madame Xing choked and didn't know what to say. Her face had already turned red. Only then did the rest of the people realize that Chu Qingyan already had His Royal Highness as her backing. If they relied on Chu Qingyan, wouldn't it be the same as leaning against a big tree to enjoy the shade? Just as this thought formed in their minds, Chu Qingyan spoke. Since no one has any problem with this, then this matter is settled. Matriarch Chu immediately tried to stop her. Her usually sharp and unkind face was now trying her best to pretend to be kind and amiable. However, because she always kept a straight face when she smiled, it was 30% ferocious and 60% frightening. Not only Chu Qingyan, but everyone else also could not bear to watch and turn their faces away. Ninth girl, don't treat Aunt as an outsider. We're all one family, so why should we live the lives of two families? If you're worried that your parents will be wronged, Aunt can promise you that as long as Aunt is here, I won't let your parents be bullied. Chu Qingyan sneered in her heart. If it weren't for you, the mistress of the household, leading the way, how could father and mother be in such a situation in the Chu family? Thank you, Auntie, for your kind intentions. Qingyan thanks you. Chu Qingyan's face was still filled with rejection. Chu Zhiming stood up angrily, but he didn't dare to point at Chu Qingyan. He turned to Father Chu and said angrily, Eldest brother, don't be ungrateful. If it were for the Chu family, would you have the status you have today? Raising rats to bite a cloth bag. It's talking about people like you. Father Chu looked at him strangely. I didn't see you raising rats, and Xiao didn't bite your rats either. Chu Zhiming was a little regretful. He shouldn't have picked on the soft persimmon. Instead, he was splashed with juice. However, Chu Qingyan had already been angered. She would never let off those who bullied her parents. Since they had already made it so clear, she didn't want to give them any face. Second Uncle Tang, you've misunderstood. If it were for my father's heroic deeds, would the Chu family have this mansion to shelter them from the wind and rain? 10 years ago, you chased my parents out of the Chu family without any explanation. Have you ever thought about how to write the words repay kindness with enmity? During this period of time, when I entered the prince's mansion, you received many congratulatory gifts. You secretly embezzled them into the treasury and didn't treat my parents well. If it weren't for my financial support, what would they be like now? Have you ever thought about how to write the words repay kindness with enmity? Chu Qingyan spoke unhurriedly, pausing between each word. Her gaze swept over the people present. They didn't dare to raise their heads to meet those clear eyes. The Chu patriarch and his wife were so angry that their faces flushed red, but they couldn't say a word. After all, what she said was the truth. However, they weren't ashamed. They felt that Chu Qingyin had a sharp tongue and couldn't be used by them anymore. They were annoyed in their hearts. After coldly watching the little fellow fight with this outrageous family, Xiao Su stood up with satisfaction. He then said to Gu Rong and Gu Yi, "There's no time like the present. Let's move out today." The matter of moving out was settled. The Chu family didn't dare to say another word. Xiao Su swept his gaze over the people present and said coldly, "This prince doesn't want anyone to disturb this prince's father-in-law and mother-in-law in the future," so his gaze was slightly suppressed. Everyone bowed their heads and didn't dare to breathe loudly. Chu Qingyin didn't pay attention to the words father-in-law and mother-in-law. She was overjoyed. The big ice cube's aura on the battlefield wasn't just for show. Only Father Chu's eyes flashed slightly. Chapter 166. Leaving the Chu manor, Chu Qingyin thought of those people holding back their anger and not daring to say anything. Her heart filled with joy. "Big Ice Block, you were so handsome just now." Chu Qingyin praised from the bottom of her heart. Xiao Su's expression was calm, but he was feeling a bit proud inside. Ever since he found out that she was not referring to the highest-ranking commander in the army when she said handsome, but rather describing how handsome he was very happy to hear her describe him like this. "If you want the Chu family to return your residence, this king will give it to Hualing." Xiao Su looked at her sparkling eyes and said in a low voice with a bit of gentleness. Unexpectedly, she shook her head. "Right now you're in the eye of the storm, and you're about to go on a long journey. I don't want you to be misunderstood because of this matter. If those people hiding in the shadows maliciously slander you for using your power to steal someone else's residence, I'm afraid those people who don't know the truth will misunderstand you again." This was something she did not want to see. This was also the reason why she had not made a move against the Chu family yet. It was because her current identity was the future king of England's princess consort. Every action represented the attitude of the Big Ice Block. So she insisted on seeking justice. She was afraid that the Big Ice Block would be unjust. She was not willing to do this. She wanted to wait until the time was right to take it all back bit by bit. Xiao Su never thought that she was worried about him. In the cold imperial family, it had been a long time since he had been cherished by someone. His heart softened and he asked in a gentle voice, "You don't need to worry about this king. You just need to follow your heart and answer this king. Are you willing in your heart? Being taken over by others, being chased out of your home, being forced out of your home for 10 years, suffering so much. Are you willing to let them get away with it and enjoy everything that should have belonged to you?" As long as she shook her head, he would take it all back for her. He had never cared about other people's misunderstandings and evaluations of him. He had never lived in other people's eyes. Chu Qingyin was a bit stunned hearing this. The Big Ice Block's tone was so gentle. If he could be like this normally, how good would that be? She was afraid that she would drown in this gentle village. However, thinking about it was just thinking about it. She still seriously considered his question, and then smiled confidently and said, "When heaven is about to give a great responsibility to a man, it will definitely make his mind bitter, his body tired, his body empty, and his actions disrupted. Therefore, I believe that there is a reason for all these things that I have encountered, and I have never complained. As for the unforgivable things those people have done to us, I will not let them go. However, I want to take back what belongs to us with my own hands. Revenge is a dish best served cold. When she was strong enough and didn't need to borrow anyone's strength, she would personally take revenge for all the suffering she had suffered back then." Xiao Su looked at the resolute expression on the little fellow's face, and his eyes flashing with confidence. Suddenly, a wave of gratification surged in his heart. All right, he was waiting for her to break out of her cocoon and be reborn. No one could only rely on one person for their entire life. Only when one became indestructible could they protect themselves and the people they cared about. Although Gu Rong and Gu Yi weren't likable, they were very efficient. In a few moments, they had already moved everything onto the carriage. Chu Feng's parents followed behind them out of the Chu family's gate. Chu Feng's father ran over with a big black cat in his arms. Inverted spring onion, Kai Kai, this is a friend that Daddy adopted a few days ago. It's called Xiao. Chu Feng's father raised the big black cat's front paw and waved it at the two. Come, come, Xiao, say hello to Inverted spring onion and Kai Kai. The big black cat seemed to be very cold and didn't even want to look at them. Chu Feng's father was so angry that he stomped his feet. Only Xiao Su and Chu Qingyan felt a group of crows fly over their heads. Seeing that the big black cat wasn't cooperating, Chu Feng's father could only give up. At this moment, Chu Qingyan ran over to help her mother pack up. Chu Feng's father stood beside his son-in-law with the big black cat in his arms and suddenly spoke. Inverted spring onion, just now you admitted that I'm your father-in-law in front of everyone. Then you should learn from Kai Kai and call me daddy. Chu Feng's father widened his eyes, his face full of anticipation. You heard wrong. Xiao Su's expression didn't change as he said. Chu Feng's father frowned. That's impossible. Firstly, he wasn't old, and secondly, he wasn't deaf. How could he have heard wrong? But looking at Inverted spring onion's expression, it didn't seem like he was lying. So did he hear wrong? Chu Feng's father was conflicted, and Xiao Su smiled faintly when he saw him. However, Chu Feng's father didn't forget the important matter at hand. He said righteously, Inverted spring onion, you won't be able to return from this trip. You have to take good care of Kai Kai. She's a little stupid and is easily bullied, so you have to pay more attention to her. Xiao Su raised his brows and looked at the little fellow beside the carriage. He didn't comment on Chu Feng's father's words. She was probably the only one bullying others on this trip. When the group separated, Chu Feng's father reluctantly raised the big black cat's front paw and waved it at the two of them. Chu Qingyan's eyes couldn't help but redden. Xiao Su raised a hand and patted her head. This prince promises you that he'll definitely bring you back safely. Whether dead or alive, he would protect her and bring her back safely. Chu Qingyan was still immersed in the sadness of parting and didn't notice the strangeness in his words. Why did he say, bring you back safely, instead of bring you back safely? All right, she nodded. At the other end of the road, Dan Yang, why do you think it's so difficult to hear my son-in-law call me daddy? Chu Feng's father was very vexed. Chu Feng's mother laughed. You miss it so much? It'll come one day. Chu Feng's father immediately perked up. When? His Highness and Kai Kai's wedding. Chu Feng's mother pursed her lips and smiled. Chu Feng's father immediately counted on his fingers. 12 golden hairpins, 13 cardamoms, and 15 hairpins. That's still 5 years away. My hair is going to turn white from waiting. Chu Feng's mother couldn't help but pat the back of her husband's hand when she heard his gloomy tone. She comforted him, time flies. 5 years will pass by quickly. Time flies like an arrow, and the sun and moon fly by. Time always passed by quickly. When Chu Qingyan and Xiao Su returned to the King of England's residence, Xining, who had been waiting for them, walked up and bowed to them. Mistress, the fourth prince is here. He wants to see you. Chu Qingyan was a little surprised. It had been 10 days since the assassination attempt on Xiao Ran, and she hadn't seen him even once. She had wanted to ask someone to pass a message to him before she left to express her feelings for him, but he had unexpectedly come by himself. She looked up at the person beside her and saw Big Ice Cube nod at her. Go ahead. She agreed and followed Xining to the side courtyard. She didn't know why he had chosen the side courtyard instead of the front hall. When she arrived, she only saw a man in a eunuch's uniform with his back facing her. She couldn't help but feel puzzled when she didn't see Xiao Ran. Just then, the man with his back facing her slowly turned around and called out in a low voice. Qingyan. Chapter 167. Chu Qingyan turned around and softly called out her name. Only then did she clearly see that the person standing in front of her was none other than Xiao Ran, whom she had not seen for more than 10 days. His much thinner appearance was even more handsome. Perhaps it was because of his injuries. His face was pale, and his lips were devoid of blood. When Chu Qingyan saw that he had lost a lot of weight, out of concern for her friend, she could not help but grumble. Why are you running around when your injuries haven't fully healed? Don't you know how to take care of yourself? That face full of anger and concern that he had not seen in a long time made Xiao Ran's heart fill with warmth. All right, Qingyan, it wasn't easy for me to come out and find you, so don't just scold me. When he finished speaking, he could not help but cover his chest and lightly cough a few times. When Chu Qingyan heard that, she lightly sighed and walked forward to help him to a stone chair at the side to sit down. She raised her head to look around and suspiciously asked, "Where are the people by your side to serve you? Why isn't a single one here?" Xiao Su shook his head. "I snuck out of the palace and did not bring anyone out." When Chu Qingyan heard that, she saw that he was wearing a eunuch's uniform and knew how he managed to sneak out of the palace. She could not help but scold him. If you wear a eunuch's uniform like this, who would know that you were the high and mighty fourth prince? If something were to happen with your already injured body, how would you be able to take it? Hearing her long-winded nagging, Xiao Ran's face revealed a faint joy. When Chu Qingyan saw that he did not regret his rash actions and instead looked happy, she felt that it was a little strange and reached out to push his shoulder. "Hey, did you hurt your brain? Otherwise, how could he suddenly become so silly?" Xiao Ran suddenly smiled, as beautiful as the sun. Even though Chu Qingyan had seen all kinds of handsome men before, she still felt that her eyes were blinded by him. She had always thought that Big Ice Cube was a cool and adorable handsome man, while this Xiao Ran in front of her was an obedient and pure handsome man. Now that she saw him smile, she was even more certain that if this guy was in the modern world, he would probably be a complete young hunk. Just as Chu Qingyan was fantasizing, Xiao Ran looked at her, his smile fading slightly, leaving only a faint ripple at the corner of his mouth. With a serious expression, he slowly said, "Qingyan, I don't think I hurt my brain, but my heart was stolen." What was this guy saying? That assassin stole his heart? Then how could he still be standing here? What kind of joke was this? Seeing that she was fooled by him, Xiao Ran didn't want to explain. He suddenly reached out to hold her hand, his expression becoming serious. "Qingyan, eldest brother is going to Fuli mountain range. It's a long and arduous journey, so you should stay in the Imperial City. I'll protect you." Xiao Ran's sudden action made her a bit confused. She couldn't help but pull her hand back, hesitantly saying, "Xiao Ran, do you know that your mother and His Highness mother, your position and His Highness position are completely opposite? Although it's a bit blunt, but look at the things that have happened recently. Can you still be at ease with your situation? And as His Highness fiancé, do you think I'll be safe by your side?" The word fiancé pierced his heart deeply. He lowered his brows dejectedly. He had finally found a girl he liked, but she was already his eldest brother's fiancée. Although his eldest brother's existence was like a god in his heart, he still couldn't accept it. He clenched his fists and slowly raised his head. "Qingyan, you're 10 years older than Imperial Brother. His personality is very stuffy. Will you be able to get used to it? If you say you're not used to it, I'll immediately take you away." "I won't, we're fine." Chu Qingyan thought he was asking if she and the Big Ice Cube didn't have anything to talk about. Although there were times when they did, it was good for them to do their own things. Xiao Ran saw that she didn't have any worries and shook his head in his heart. It seemed like she still didn't understand what an engagement meant. Eldest brother had never been close to women and treated Qingyan like his own little brother or sister. So he secretly decided that when he grew up, he would go to Imperial Father and Imperial Mother to have Imperial Father cancel the engagement between eldest brother and Qingyan. Imperial Father loved him so much. As long as he wanted something, he would give it to him. So the only two things he needed to do now were to wait for Qingyan to grow up. At the same time, he needed to become strong. Only then would Imperial Father and Imperial Mother have a reason to agree. Towards Xiao Ran's sudden distraction, Chu Qingyan was a bit confused. She waved her hand in front of his eyes. Xiao Ran, why are you in a daze? I'll have someone quickly send you back to the palace. Otherwise, the matter of you sneaking out will be quickly discovered. At that time, it won't be so simple. I know I can't stay for too long. Wait a moment. Xiao Ran took out a wooden puppet from his bosom. His fingers clenched tightly, and then he handed it to her. I carved this a while ago when I was learning how to craft. Originally, I wanted to give it to you as a gift during the Mid-Autumn Festival. Unfortunately, you left too early, and I couldn't find a suitable opportunity to give it to you. Then something happened. This time, it'll be a parting gift for you. Since you want to leave, I can't persuade you to stay. It'll be a long journey. If you miss me, you can take it out to sea. Xiao Ran said emotionally. After Chu Qingyan took it, although the carvings on it were a bit rough, it wasn't hard to see that the person on it was her. Her long dress fluttered, and there was a bit of a fairy descending to the mortal world. Chu Qingyan was pleasantly surprised. This was the first time she had received a handmade wooden puppet. She said sincerely, "Thank you." Xiao Ran looked at Chu Qingyan's bright and clear face in front of him, and his eyes gradually deepened. In the end, he reached out and hugged her. Although his voice was still a bit hoarse from his puberty period, it was already sufficiently affectionate. "Qingyan, you said before that all encounters in the world are reunions after a long separation. I look forward to the day we meet again. You have to take care of yourself." Before Chu Qingyan could react to what was going on, the person who had hugged her so tightly had already let go of his hand. With his back to her, he walked away step by step from her line of sight. "Because I'm afraid that if I turn my head, I won't be able to resist the urge to make you stay. Qingyan, wait for me. One day, I will have the power to protect you. Whatever you want, whatever you don't want, I will give it to you." Chu Qingyan held the wooden puppet in her hand and finally came back to her senses. She smiled gently. "Xiao Ran, you take care too. Although the Sichuan emperor and consort, you were the main culprits who had caused Big Ice Cube's tragic childhood, and Xiao Ran's harm to Big Ice Cube was indirect, she still couldn't blame him. He was still too young. In her eyes, he was just a 12 or 13-year-old child. However, because she looked at this child with the mentality of a 20-year-old, she completely didn't expect that this young man in front of her had already developed feelings for her that he shouldn't have. Imperceptibly, it had an unpredictable impact on her future. Chapter 168. As night fell, the King of England's residence welcomed a rare guest. Xiao. With a pot of wine in his left hand and another in his right, he leisurely walked into the prince's residence. Hearing the servant's report, Xiao Su walked out of the room and happened to see his second brother standing under the banyan tree. He raised his hand and shook the wine pot in his hand, saying in a dissolute manner, "With the moon, the wind, and the departure, how can there be no wine to accompany it?" As he spoke, the wine pot in his hand flew towards Xiao Su. Xiao Su had always been in the mood to shake his head and sigh at this straightforward second brother of his, but tonight he was indeed in the mood to drink. Thus, the two turned and walked towards the pavilion in the middle of the lake. They sat down in the pavilion. Huang Yi had already received the order and quickly prepared 2 or 3 dishes to go with the wine, then left with the servants. Xiao Yao saw that Huang Yi was graceful and witty, so he couldn't help but tease. "Don't blame Imperial Brother Yu for not liking the women that Chindi sent up. It seems that there are beauties in the residence, so you don't like those common women." Xiao Su faintly glanced at him. "Put away your glib tongue, or you can leave immediately." Xiao Yao immediately spread his hands and compromised. Fine. Chindi is scared of you. You really take my good intentions for ill intent. If I didn't see that you were leaving, I specially came to see you off." "What? You don't even let me speak freely? After so many years, haven't you said enough?" Xiao Su disagreed. Xiao Yao nodded in agreement. "After being a dissolute for so many years, I'm somewhat used to it. Chindi finds that I'm becoming more and more charming." Listening to narcissistic people talking narcissistically, Xiao Su never interjected. "Forget it, you're such a dull and boring person. You won't understand, even if I tell you about these romantic matters. Xiao bit open the cork, and the fragrance of the wine immediately overflowed. 20 years of new or Hong. How is it fragrant? As he spoke, he helped to fill their cups. Xiao Su picked up the wine glass and took a sip. Not bad. The color of the wine is pure, and the taste is sweet. It is indeed a good wine. Of course, this is what I got from the heavenly fragrance brothel. It's the real deal. Xiao laughed heartily, completely ignoring the fact that others would look down on him because of his description of the brothel. How much longer do you want to stay in Fireworks Wine Alley? Xiao Su slowly looked at him through the clear wine. He was supposed to be a proud son of heaven, but because of his decadence, he was disgraced by others. However, there was no disdain in Xiao Su's expression. It was as if he was just asking a younger brother who had been away from home for many days when he would return home. Xiao's hand, which was holding the wine glass, paused for a moment. Then, he slowly shook the wine glass and chuckled. The night was too dark to see if his smile was sincere or not. It's been 10 years. I've already forgotten what I was like back then. On one side, I was depraved. On the other side, I was clear-headed. I struggled bitterly. It seemed like I was happy, but it also seemed like I was free. In reality, I lived a meaningless life. When he finished speaking, he downed the wine in his cup in one gulp. It was hard to tell whether it was sweet or bitter. As the wine entered his throat, his complex emotions swirled 1,000 times. Xiao Su turned to look at him. Although this was what his second brother said, among the brothers in the imperial family, he lived the most thoroughly. He knew what he wanted and what he didn't want, so he always lived according to his own methods. I'm leaving tomorrow. Imperial Father doesn't have many people he can use. Don't you plan on coming back to help Sichuan? Xiao laughed, then raised his eyes and shook his head with a smile. Imperial brother? Oh, Imperial brother. What should I say? He treats you like this, but you're wholeheartedly thinking of Sichuan. When you left the capital, you shouldn't have come back. Sooner or later, the burden on your shoulders will be as heavy as a mountain and crush you alive. Xiao Su's eyes flashed. In the end, he looked at the wine in his hand that was rippling slightly. As he drank it, a burning sensation immediately spread between his lips and teeth. It reached straight to his heart. Xiao quickly filled his cup and sneered, Imperial brother, I can understand your pain. Everyone is pushing you too hard. One needs you to contribute to the country, but doesn't want your contributions to overshadow your masters. The other needs you to protect your relatives, but restricts you. Fortunately, my mother only wants me to live well. As long as I live well, I don't need to worry about anything else. I'm also filial enough. I've always lived according to her wishes, so I'm carefree and unrestrained. He raised his brows and looked at his imperial brother in front of him. He continued, but what about you? You're filial to her, but she thinks you have ulterior motives and is always on guard against you. You're filial to her, but she's always dissatisfied and wants a yard when given an inch. Imperial brother, why do people have to live so tirelessly? Xiao Su gripped the cup in his hand, but his fingertips were turning white bit by bit. His second brother was right. He was in a dilemma. What he wanted to protect, he couldn't protect. What he wanted to abandon, he couldn't abandon. His life was difficult and powerless. Xiao sighed softly and filled his cup again. In this life, don't ask about the free and unfettered sky. Since ancient times, all things have flowed down the east. Imperial brother, look on the bright side. All right, after talking so much, why don't I see your little princess? When Xiao Su heard the word little fellow, the color in his eyes improved a lot. She's organizing the things for tomorrow's trip. TSK, TSK, TSK. I have to say, you've picked up a treasure. Your little princess, in terms of appearance, will definitely be a devastatingly beautiful woman when she grows up. Her temper isn't bad. As long as she's quick-witted, she might be able to help you if you encounter any trouble in the future. Xiao clicked his tongue somewhat enviously. You should also ask Imperial Grandfather to grant you a marriage. In any case, Imperial Grandfather is still in my residence. Xiao Su raised his brows and looked at him. His words were like a smile that wasn't a smile. When Xiao Yao heard this, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. This proposal wasn't kind at all, okay? He almost forgot that Imperial Grandfather was still in the King of England's residence. He'd better not meet him, so as to avoid catching him and giving him all kinds of education. Ahem, Imperial brother. This younger brother suddenly remembered that there are chores in the residence to deal with. So, I have to prepare to leave. Xiao Ran smiled embarrassedly. He straightened his clothes and stood up. Xiao Su saw through his thoughts, but he didn't expose him. He filled his cup with wine and raised it to toast him. If you want to be yourself, go to Yingchun Courtyard and find Water Spirit. She will arrange it for you. Xiao Yao heard this and sighed softly. Imperial brother, you always think too much for others and too little for yourself. Xiao Su smiled self-deprecatingly. Because I'm the eldest brother. The eldest brother was like a father. The responsibilities that his father didn't fulfill, as the eldest brother, he could only take over one by one. Xiao Yao understood his thoughts and finally raised his cup, this cup of wine. Imperial brother, I toast you. If this trip can be safe, this younger brother hopes that you will go as far away as possible and never come back. After Xiao Yao finished speaking, he downed the wine in one gulp. Xiao Su paused for a moment, but in the end, he drank the wine. The wine was rich and mellow, but for some reason, it was as bitter as a medicinal soup, making people unable to bear to frown. Xiao Yao confidently tossed the wine cup aside, then turned his back to his imperial brother and waved his hand. He sang loudly, "This trip will not be a good one," dreaming of the mortal world and hiding in the mortal world. Listening to the voice gradually fading away, Xiao Su held the wine cup in his hand and drank cup after cup. Chapter 169. Xiao Su held the wine glass in his hand and looked at the moon and stars in the night sky. Suddenly, he felt that his life was empty. For nearly 20 years, he had scrupulously followed the rules and never stepped out of line. However, no one said to him that he had done a good job. What he got was either scolding or cold eyes. He raised his glass to the wind and moon. The first toast was to God, who allowed him to be born but never showed him the way to go. He drank it in one gulp. The second toast was to the royal family, who gave him a noble status but forgot to add the warmth of family. He drank it in one gulp. The third toast was to himself, who had been at a loss for so many years and still refused to turn back. He drank it in one gulp. The silver moon sprinkled down, as if draping a thin layer of gauze over the person who kept repeating the action of drinking. It was hazy and carried a sense of sadness and loneliness. Every time he drank a cup of wine, his eyes became clearer. The more he drank, the brighter they became. He was like a cheetah hibernating in the night, his eyes eerie. But if someone walked closer to take a look, they would see that his clear eyes were filled with pain. His heart that had been silent for so many years was awakened by his second brother little by little. Those dusty past events that had been buried for a long time were once again uncovered. He had been betrayed, abandoned, and hurt. However, from birth to now, he had never stopped longing for family. The wine jar was empty and the night was dark. His heart sank. The cups and plates were in a mess and the moonlight was scarce. He stood up shakily. At this moment, only the wind and moon could accompany him. Chu Qingyan, who was packing, was a little worried when Xiao Su didn't come back. Didn't they say that the second prince came and they were drinking and chatting happily? Why didn't the big ice block come back when the second prince had left? Thinking about it, she was a little worried. She told Hong Yi and Xining what she was doing and then walked to the pavilion in the middle of the lake with the lanterns prepared by the servants. There were only patrolling guards along the way. Chu Qingyan asked a few servants and learned that the big ice block was still in the pavilion. She immediately quickened her pace. I heard that the second prince brought wine. I wonder if Big Ice Cube can hold his liquor well. Don't fall asleep like this. The autumn night is chilly. It would be bad if you catch a cold. As she thought of this, She became even more worried, and her footsteps became even more joyful. However, before she reached the pavilion, she saw the person standing by the pavilion. She heaved a sigh of relief and slowly walked over. Big Ice Cube, it's late. We have to set off tomorrow. It's time to. Before she could finish her words, she saw the person who had turned around upon hearing her voice. His eyes were brighter than the moon in the sky. She couldn't help but stare blankly and forgot what she was going to say. With the center of the lake as the scenery, the person in front of him was in front of him. The autumn wind rushed into his sleeves, and his clothes fluttered. The silver-white mask flashed under the moonlight, and his black brocade robe seemed to blend into the dark night. However, the sparkling waves behind him seemed to have plated him with a layer of sparkling crystal, making him look like a god. Chu Qingyin stared at him in a daze. A thought flashed through her mind. He was clearly someone who could rely on his looks to make a living, but he always used his abilities to prove himself. Her big ice cube was really great. In her daze, she didn't notice that the person standing in front of her was a little dazed. He was a little at a loss, like a newborn child with a bit of naivety. The little fellow in front of him seemed to be looking at him. Why was she looking at him? In the past, no one dared to look at him so calmly. However, when this little fellow looked at him, he didn't feel any displeasure. Instead, he felt a faint joy. Why? He suddenly didn't know the answer. One question after another drove him to slowly walk towards her. He was clearly a drunk person, but his steps were steadier than anyone else's. When she saw the big ice cube walking towards her, Chu Qingyin came back to her senses and couldn't help but grin. Just as she was about to report to him about the progress of her packing, a sudden breeze blew over, mixed with the faint fragrance of wine. Chu Qingyin couldn't help but frown. At this time, the person had already stood in front of her. She raised her head, but a hand fell down and gently caressed her cheek. Chu Qingyin stood there in a daze. Her bright eyes reflected a pair of beautiful eyes that were equally bright, but filled with uncertainty. "Where are you from?" A soft whisper sounded as if it was in a dream. Chu Qingyin suddenly woke up. Was the big ice cube drunk? Her entire body was surrounded by the intoxicating fragrance of wine, as if she was trapped in a wine cellar. She didn't answer, so the person who was caressing her patiently asked again. "I'm for the 21st century. My surname is Chu. My name is Chu Yin." The person in front of her softly muttered her name a few times before his gaze fell back onto her face. His fingers caressed her cheek as he slowly said, "Then will you leave?" What's wrong with the big ice cube? Could it be that the second prince had said something to him? Why did he become so anxious after drinking? But now wasn't the time to care about this. She seriously and solemnly replied, "No, I won't leave." "Then how long will you stay?" "Many people have already left." His clear eyes were filled with a thin layer of mist, making it impossible for people to see what he was thinking. But she could clearly feel the sadness that came from his heart. Her nose suddenly turned sour as she said without hesitation, "Unless you don't want me, we'll live and die together. We won't turn our backs on each other." She couldn't believe the words that came out of her mouth without thinking, but she didn't regret it. "All right." The thin calluses that came from long-term martial arts practice slid across her delicate skin. Then he placed his hand on her slender shoulder and gently pulled her into his embrace. Chu Qingyin was shocked by the big ice cube's sudden action. "What's wrong with the big ice cube?" But she heard him say helplessly in her ear, "It's too tiring to be alone. Lend me your shoulder for a while." Chu Qingyin's eyes turned sour when she heard that. Her hands that were hanging by her sides slowly lifted up and wrapped around his waist. "I know that it's been hard on you for so many years. I wasn't here in the past, but now that I'm here, I won't let you live alone in torment. You and I will taste the sweetness together. You and I will share the bitterness together." The two of them hugged each other under the cool breeze and bright moon, warming each other's hearts. "Little fellow, this prince is sleepy." After saying that, his breathing became even. But this made Chu Qingyin suffer. Such a big person leaned his entire weight on her. Even Chu Qingyan, who called herself a tough woman in the modern era, almost couldn't support it. But she still felt a little moved. She felt a little funny, a little sad, and a little relieved. She was moved. After going through so many things, the big ice cube was still able to maintain his original heart. Only when he was drunk would he unreservedly reveal the weakness in his heart. What was funny was that even though he was tired, he still remembered to tell her that he was sleepy. What was sad was that the big ice cube, who always put himself in other people's shoes, was really lonely. Fortunately, she was the only one who could see this fragile big ice cube. She felt that the distance between the two of them seemed to be one step closer. But Chu Qingyan suddenly patted her face. She clearly didn't drink, but why did she feel her cheeks heat up? Could it be that the wine didn't intoxicate her, but she was intoxicated herself? Beauty didn't intoxicate her, but she was intoxicated herself? Chu Qingyan teased herself and shook her head. Then she half dragged and half carried the big ice cube, resigned to her fate, and walked towards the main courtyard. But the breath that blew against her ear was a little itchy. She felt her ear faintly burning. Just when she was at a loss, she heard a murmur and her whole body trembled. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure,